Good evening and welcome to the 43rd meeting of fiscal year 2025 for the Milton Planning Board. At this time, I would like to call the meeting to order and begin by introducing the members of the board and our staff.
Cheryl Tagayas, Secretary.
Sean Fahey, member.
Meg Yulfield, member.
And Meredith Hall serving as chair. With us on Zoom, we have Cheyenne.
Cheyenne Frazier, Assistant Director of Planning.
And Julia.
Julia Getman, clerk.
Great, thank you and welcome to all here tonight and on Zoom. We'll begin first with our administrative items. We have 3 sets of minutes that have been completed, but Cheryl is going to be just looking over those and adding any edits for the next meeting. So we'll defer the meeting minutes approval for tonight. Next meeting dates that we have scheduled, we have next Tuesday, which is the 13th, and then our following regularly scheduled meeting is on the 27th. So those would be the next regular scheduled meetings.
22nd.
Oh, 22nd.
No.
I'm sorry, I had written 27th down. Okay, so the 13th and the 22nd. Okay. Cheyenne, did you have an update that you would like to provide?
Just a recent update for the planning board. I don't know if everybody in the meeting attended town meeting, but we did have some good progress. We got our ADU bylaw passed and our site plan bylaw passed, so that is some good steps for us.
Great.
So that's my only update.
Great. And I just want to thank Cheyenne again for preparing the presentations. I think those were really helpful in walking through town meeting members with those. So thank you, Cheyenne, for your work on that. We really appreciate it. So at this time, we now can go to citizen speak. Please be mindful of those who would like to speak. If you sent a letter, please know that we read the letters. So we'd like to ask those who did not write a letter to be able to speak, because we have limited time, and just wanted to allow, for those who did not send a letter, to be able to address the board. So,
Meredith, before you begin that, we're going to have a presentation tonight. Were you also planning to take public comment after the presentation from UTL, since this will be an opportunity for people to see what UTL is presenting?
Yeah, and some people may want to wait and to hold off their comments, so that would be absolutely fine.
So just to let folks know, they have both opportunities?
Right, I think so. Okay. That would be fine. And depending on our time, obviously, our time limit. So, yeah, if there's comments on what our consultants provide tonight, that would be absolutely fine. So. With that, if there's anyone from the public who would like to speak?
Well, I'll
Okay.
put my foot in the cone of the water.
Okay. Welcome. If you can just state your name and address for the record, please. That would be
Yes,
great.
my name is Andrew Hanley.
If you can have a seat here, and then you can just speak into the microphone. So
I'm new to this.
that's great. Not a
Thank
problem.
you.
So everyone can hear. Yes.
Before we get started, I'm sure we're going to have tons of speakers. Do you want to do a time limit so we can get through a good chunk
Yeah.
of them? Or?
Yes. If we could keep the comments limited to 3 minutes per person.
Sure, certainly.
Okay.
Andrew Hanley. I'm 31 years living on Cape Cod Lane in Precinct 3. I just wanted to make a comment. First of all, I want to thank the board for their hard work in coming up with various plans. 10% to 25% plans for the MBTA communities law. I spent between 1990 and 2002 taking the trolley. I would walk from Cape Cod Lane to Milton Village, 20 minutes. Then would take the trolley to Ashburn Station, then to South Station, where I worked in finance for roughly 20 years. So I allocated roughly an hour and a half to do that. My wife is a medical practitioner, nurse practitioner. She could never use the rapid transit system. We are a medical community here in Boston, world class. We have a lot of medical professionals in town, and they're not using the trolley, and they're not using the red line for obvious reasons. They got to get to and from work quickly. So I really think that we need to support our Senator Driscoll and our Representative Richie Wells in advocating that this town of ours, this beautiful town of ours, be classified as an adjacent community rather than as a rapid transit community. Because at the end of the day, if we have 1,000 units or 2,500 units, we're still going to be stuck with a system that in reality is not a rapid transit system. Doesn't function like one. Just look at the highways. Look how busy they are. So that's all I have to say on that. Okay?
Thank you.
And also the thing is we're lumped in with 12 other communities or 11 other communities. I look at them, they're all cities, or they have subways, they have commuter rails, Cambridge, Somerville, Quincy, so on in Braintree. We're not in that situation here. We have a commuter rail nearby that would justify us being classified as an adjacent community if we could get that, convince the authorities of that. So that's all I have to say.
Great.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Appreciate your
appreciate it.
speaking. And next,
Good evening.
good evening.
I'm Pete Jackson. I live at 14 Capon Street in the Elliott Street corridor, Tier 1. Our country is experiencing a housing crisis at the national, state, and local scales. It includes both supply and affordability. For the country, this means homelessness, hunger, medical crisis, substandard living conditions, and a lack of economic opportunity. For the state, in addition to the above, it affects our ability to attract businesses, difficulty in retaining our young people, and net out-migration. For Milton, it means our public employees and our kids can't afford to live here, and less fortunate neighbors suffer housing and food insecurity. The burden of providing additional, affordable, and quality housing needs to be shared by every community in the state. The state government has for years tried to encourage an increase in housing production. There used to be more federal and state funding to support both housing and infrastructure development. These funds have largely dried up. The state has attempted both a carrot and stick approach, with 40B supporting higher densities in exchange for affordability. More recently, it has leaned more heavily on the stick approach with the MBTA Communities Housing Initiative. I've been involved in these debates around Milton's approach and compliance since early in the process. I thought the planning board had developed a relatively fair and equitable plan in 2023, which was adopted by town meeting. I have to read my remarks, otherwise I babble. I supported it along with most of my Precinct 2 neighbors on the referendum vote. But I was disappointed when neighbors overturned the plan. Despite reluctance from the planning board and the select board, we now have an opportunity to adopt a fairly equitable plan that achieves the 25% compliance mandate. I encourage you to adopt this compliant plan so the town can move on. The planning board can use the detailed requirements contained in the zoning and its site plan review process to assure that proposals under the plan minimize the disruption to neighborhoods. For equity's sake, the plan must include the Fairmont and East Milton Square districts to reduce some of the excess density in the Elliott Street corridor. If the planning board is unable to support an equitable 25% compliant plan, I'll support asking the select board to step in and submit a compliant plan to the state on behalf of the town. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else from the public? Yes, come.
Good evening.
Good evening. Sorry.
Hello, my name is Joan Fall. I live at 172 Granite Ave. I'm a town meeting member for Precinct 7. And I want to start by expressing my gratitude and appreciation to you guys for all the work the planning board has done for the MBTA zoning over the last years. I watched most of the planning sessions, and the level of detail you get into that it's required has become very clear to me. I know the process is very complex and not without its challenges, so thank you for your dedication to this. I come before you tonight to express the views of myself and some of my neighbors, all of whom strongly encourage adopting the adjacent community compliance plan that the Planning Board discussed sending to the state last week. This plan recognizes Milton's desire to comply with the state requirements while also addressing the misclassification of our town. It's unfortunate that this classification error has led to tensions between neighborhoods. The concerns expressed during the planning sessions last week made it clear that even those who still support rapid transit classification do not believe that their neighborhoods can accommodate the level of housing density required for compliance. I appreciate the Planning Board's attentiveness to those concerns. I also support my neighbors in those precincts and agree they do not have the space. It's clear that Milton does not have the space for 2,500 more units, so the classification must be changed. I want to thank Senator Driscoll for coming to town meeting and clarifying some points. As he noted, Milton is one of only 12 communities in the state that is designated as rapid transit. However, unlike the other rapid transit communities, which are largely cities or small, large towns, who have actual rapid transit stations, Milton has a 40-seat trolley that shares service with Boston. The trolley station has very limited parking, and unlike the Red Line trains that operate underground, the trolley operates above ground and is often shut down during inclement weather, making it an unreliable option when people need it most. It's also worth noting that just after the voters rejected Article 1 in February of 2024, the Red Line signage began appearing at some of the trolley stops that hadn't been there prior to the vote. Finally, I encourage those advocating for more dense housing to consider the impact on our town. Where would this housing go in your neighborhood? And where is the affordability in this plan? These are important questions that need to be part of the conversation. Thank you for your time and your thoughtful consideration to this.
Thank you, Joan. Anyone else? Yes. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't, we did receive your letter. So yeah, we're just trying to allow people who didn't send a letter to speak first. Sorry, couldn't see back there. But if we have time later and you would like to make a comment, yes, please.
Hello, my name is Anthony Larkin. I live at 1061 Brush Hill Road. One of the things I wanted to just raise is that the MBTA Communities Act is not the only path to addressing housing in the town, right? It's one mandate driven by the state, and it's very strict in terms of what we need to comply, but it doesn't mean it's the only thing we can do, right? So what we should be doing is focusing on reducing the burden that the state's mandating, qualify for adjacent communities, and there's ways, I think, to do that. One of the arguments is the radius, half-mile radius surrounding the stations, the area of which does not fall within fully the town of Milton. The other half is in Boston, which we can't develop. And so we have too much of a burden being put on us with that being a classification of our town. And we need to push back and come up with a unique scenario because Milton has unique circumstances that applies to us. And once we've complied, then we can come up with a plan driven by this planning board that does address housing, but do it in a way that meets the requirements of our town, is not as restrictive as the mandate that we're being driven by the state. So it's not the end-all be-all of how to address this. The other piece is that I don't understand the argument from the people that are both want a 25% plan, but don't want it in their backyard. And in America, you don't have the right to be virtuous with other people's property. I do think that I applaud your virtuousness, but you don't have the right to donate other people's property for consideration. to say, let's spread it here, let's spread it there. I think multi-family housing development should be contiguous in areas where there's existing multifamily housing. That's in relationship or within adjacent to transit. And if we want to keep the fabric of our town, we shouldn't be bulldozing neighborhoods. We should be making sure that we have, we're not spot zoning certain areas and changing the fabric of certain neighborhoods. We should do it in a contiguous way that has and meets the characteristics of existing neighborhoods.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Great. Anyone else from the public here? Yes, welcome. And then we'll go to the, after you, we'll go to the online.
Brian O'Halloran, 7 Morton Terrace, town meeting member, precinct 3. I have some thoughts in support of the 10% plan based on the misclassification of the Mattapan trolley as rapid transit. The rapid transit designation should not rely on convention, bureaucratic fair policy, or arbitrary characterization. Instead, Milton's transit characterization by EOHLC and the MBTA should be based on an analysis of the existing physical characteristics and operational ability of the Mattapan line, as well as the detailed comparison of the Mattapan line to other transit systems within the MBTA network. It's abundantly clear that Milton's classification as a rapid transit community under EOHLC's MBTA Community Act guidelines fails to account for the unique qualities of the Mattapan trolley that distinguish it from the rest of the MBTA and rapid transit systems. In addition, there's no guarantee that the Mattapan Line Transformation Initiative will achieve the desired results. The project is already several years delayed, is over a decade away from completion, and even if the transformation is completed, it will not address several of the claims that support reclassification. There is a solution for these issues that we as a town have struggled with over the 2 years as we've tried to abide by the one-size-fits-all guidelines. The solution is for the planning board to support the 10% plan and then work with the select board and our elected state representatives in support of Senator Driscoll's amendment number 308 that the trolley shall not be considered a rapid transit modality. Please support the 10% plan. Thank you.
Thank you very
So,
much.
Meredith, I would like to point out that some of the speakers have also emailed us, and some have also spoken at other meetings. So I see 3 hands raised, and
Yeah,
I'd like
so-
to get a showing of hands of how many people would like to speak before UTIL's presentation in the audience. So we have 2. So we have 5 people. I'd like for us to hear from all 5 that would like to speak at this time then.
Okay, so, all right, so why don't we finish with those who are in the public? I don't know who, anyway, I'm going to it. But, yeah, who, yes.
Can I just ask,
Yeah.
will we have the ability to speak after the utility?
Yes, so you might want to wait and see the presentation. Yeah, that's great.
Thanks.
That's good.
Thank you. I'm Nora Harrington. I live at 5 Columbine Road in Precinct 2, and I'm a town meeting member. And I do want to thank the Planning Board for their work on this issue. I am here tonight to encourage you to approve a 25% compliant, reasonable, and fair zoning plan, an article for our upcoming town meeting. I urge you to approve a 25% plan that opens up opportunities for multifamily housing in multiple neighborhoods in Milton. And let me tell you why I believe that. There's a real opportunity to create a multifamily district in the Fairmont area, which is less than a half a mile from the Fairmont Avenue commuter rail station, and can relieve some of the density in the Elliott Street corridor, and may enable you to eliminate altogether the proposed Blue Hills triplex area, which already has many small lots, as you know, and is already quite dense. I support the Elliott Street corridor being an important part of the 25% plan, the area where I live. I think we can have multi-housing there, not a NIMBY, as one of the other speakers said tonight. But there's no reason to put 4 units on a 10,000 square foot parcel near Elliott Street when the Fairmont Avenue area also makes sense from a zoning perspective. The lot sizes in the Fairmont neighborhood are similar to those in the Elliott Street neighborhood. The same zoning of 3 units per lot could be used in the Fairmont area as you can use in the Elliott Street neighborhood. It's within walking distance of a supermarket and many amenities, and it's within half a mile of an MBTA station, allowing us to alleviate, it's within the MBTA zoning. It allows us to alleviate some of the density that you're proposing for the Elliott Street area and potentially for the Blue Hills triplex. And I've talked with neighbors over the past week in Precinct 2, and while most can actually wrap their heads around 3 units on a 10,000 square foot lot in Elliott Street, they're not happy with the idea of 4 units on a 10,000 square foot lot, because maintaining open space really can and should be one of the achievable goals of this zoning. And I remember when the 2023 zoning was proposed and the goals that were initially set forth, and maintaining open space was clearly, I think, one of the 5 or 6 goals that were set forth for creating zoning. As a planning board, your job is to create zoning that makes sense, not to create zoning due to your personal preferences. And I have heard things like, well, that's a lovely neighborhood of single-family homes. Most of Milton is a lovely neighborhood of single-family homes, including the Elliott Street neighborhood. So, let's talk about what makes sense. The Fairmont Hill area makes sense from a zoning perspective for the reasons I said above. Just providing opportunities for more multifamily housing in that neighborhood makes sense. I know most of you have fought against the compliant zoning plan for some time now, but the courts are against us. The state wants a plan, and from what I understand, it was reiterated just today by the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities that we are in the 25% zone. So I hope we don't
reach 3 minutes.
Okay. Milton needs a compliant plan, especially now as we struggle to get back on a correct financial footing. And I hope for financial reasons as well that you will move this planning forward and get us to the point where we're no longer at the risk of spending money or losing grants from Massachusetts. Thank you.
That's great. All right, and one more, and then we'll go to the 3 on Zoom. And then I'd like to get started. Welcome.
Welcome. Joe Curran, Grafton Ave. Good evening. I'd like to speak tonight on recent developments regarding the MBTA Communities Act, particularly as they relate to the Milton's unique challenges and positions. First, I want to be clear. I support housing. I believe in thoughtful, inclusive planning that addresses regional needs and helps provide more opportunities for people to live in communities like ours. However, I do not support the current requirements imposed on Milton under the MBTA Communities Act. Milton has been placed in the highest compliance tier, one of only 12 communities in the entire state with this designation. This subjects us to an outsized zoning obligation that does not fairly reflect our town's scale, infrastructure, or local planning context. These top-tier requirements are simply disproportionate. According to a recent NBC Boston report, legal and legislative battles over the act are still unfolding. While the Massachusetts Supreme Court recently upheld the law's constitutionality, many of us remain concerned about the process behind the implementation. The guidelines that the communities like Milton were being asked to follow were not properly promulgated, and questions about transparency and procedural fairness continue. On May 5th, Senator Driscoll addressed the issue directly in his remarks to the Milton Town Meeting members. He acknowledged the divisive nature of the law and voiced strong support for reclassification of Milton to ensure we are treated more equitably going forward. I also appreciate and recognize the Planning Board's work in developing a 10% plan, an approach that reflects the good faith and commitment to responsible local governance. As the process moves forward, I urge us to remain engaged, assertive, and clear-eyed in advocating for a solution that works for Milton and one that supports housing, but also represents the distinct character and capacity of the community. I don't support the 25% plan that was presented by the Select Board in 2023, and I would support, I would understand if this board would to present a 25% plan that you have been working on that is obviously much fairer than what was presented in 2023 at town meeting.
Thank you very much. Okay. Cheyenne, so who do we have on Zoom with hands up?
Chairperson Hall, could I ask you 3 super quick questions, and they build on each other, and they're yes.
You know what?
yes.
We really don't have time because we need to get to this. We can ask later if there's time, but we can't answer questions during citizen speak
Why not?
because it's not a Q&A time.
Answer 3 super quick questions.
Later, when we allow you to speak after you've heard the presentation.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so who do we have, Cheyenne, on Zoom?
So first is Andrea Lizio.
Okay, welcome.
Hi, thank you. Andrea Lizio, town meeting member, precinct 7. I will be very quick because I share a lot of the same sentiment as others have shared tonight. However, I feel like it can't be repeated too often. When East Milton raised concerns regarding the MBTA zoning last year, we were not concerned for our neighborhood only. We were also concerned about the 25% burden throughout town. For those in Precinct 2 and on the Elliott Street corridor, we know exactly how you feel. We felt the very same way when East Milton was going to get around 50% or 1,100 units on top of the 100+ units under construction as we speak. To our planning board, thank you, all of you, for your countless selfless hours and efforts you've poured into this difficult zoning situation. I have a very hard time hearing complaints such as, the planning board hasn't done anything, they've had a whole year. For anyone attending or watching these meetings regularly, you know that is miles away from the truth. It becomes clearer every day that you are in a very difficult position. At every turn, there is another reason why something won't work or someone isn't happy. It's become clearer that's because we cannot handle the 25% burden, not to mention any additional requirements pushed down the rapid transit pipeline that our Senator Bill Driscoll alluded to last week. Thank you, Senator Driscoll, for sharing your concerns at town meeting and urging us to work together to support the planning board in reclassification as it, and I quote, would certainly help the conversations and negotiations taking place right now at the State House. And the point is, together we achieve a lot more than fighting against each other. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Next, we have Donna Dickerson.
Okay.
Yes, hi. Can you hear me?
Yes, welcome.
Hi, thank you very much. I'm Donna Dickerson, a resident, 14 Capon Street. For 30 years, I commuted via the Mattapan trolley and the Red Line to and from my job in Cambridge. I can attest from my lived experience that the trolley is a reliable and rapid connection from Capon Street to Ashmont and then to Cambridge. Otherwise, I would not have moved to Milton in the 80s. There has been no classification error. I do support a 25% compliant plan with equitable distribution so as not to overburden the Elliott Street corridor. I do not support reclassification. I welcome multifamily housing in my Elliott Street neighborhood. I would like to move forward with a 25% plan and stop spending further time and dollars pursuing reclassification. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And we have one last person, Cheyenne?
Our last person is Elaine.
Hi there, Elaine Benson, Precinct 7, Granite Place. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, welcome.
Thank you. So I just want to express my strong support for the planning board to pass a 25% compliance plan on time. We've already gone to the negotiating table with the state, and the reality is that we were not granted reclassification as an adjacent community. Instead, the state brought a lawsuit against us, and meanwhile, Milton has spent nearly 2 years working on a plan. The planning board has worked incredibly hard, and the town has spent significant taxpayer dollars on legal fees. We've lost valuable grant funding, and this issue has deeply divided our community. At this time, continuing to negotiate with the state without presenting a compliant plan leaves us in a very vulnerable position. We'd be going back to the table empty-handed, and as the first community that outright challenged the law. I don't believe we're viewed in a favorable light, and without a plan, we're not showing good faith. I understand the desire to keep advocating for reclassification, and I support continued discussions with the state. But delaying a plan, especially when we are so close, does a disservice to the town. Refusing to act could backfire, just like when we failed to work with developers in East Milton and ended up with the 40B projects that were imposed on us with no community control. That's not a path I want to see us repeat. We should be looking at zoning equitably across Milton. The spirit of the MBTA Communities Law is to put a significant portion of housing near public transit, which I support. But we also need to spread some zoning across town to create diverse options for different needs and lifestyles. It's important to remember these are zoned units, not all built units. Many of the areas being considered already contain housing, so the net new number of units would be lower than some of the figures that people have been citing. Ultimately, this is about local control, good governance, and realistic planning. I want to urge the planning board to pass a 25% compliant plan by the deadline. Otherwise, I fear the consequences of once again being out of compliance with no leverage and no plan to protect us. Thank you so much for your hard work.
Thank you. Great. So with that, I think we can move to inviting our consultants to join us.
While they're joining, has there been word from HLC on what was submitted on Monday?
So yes, I was actually, while she is coming on. So I was invited to join a meeting with our consultant and HLC and I asked Sean to come as a planning board member as well, and Cheyenne and Nick Milano and HLC staff. We were able to go through, and that's part of what we're going to go through tonight, looking at the adjacent plan. We first went through the adjacent districts of what we had submitted to them, and then we also went through the districts, the questions that we had from the slide presentation that you saw that UTEAL had sent out asking, our consultants were asking HLC if those were considered districts that we could use. So we did get some positive information, and I'll let Zoe include that with the presentation.
And before that, did they address the classification of rapid transit?
It was. I will say it wasn't decision makers in the room. It was mostly staff. And
was it mentioned at all?
Yes, it was mentioned that they were not at this time looking to reclassify Milton.
So as of today, our classification as far as HLC is concerned is still 25%?
They're still saying 25%.
Rapid transit community.
Yes, correct.
We didn't talk about it necessarily, Cheryl.
Yeah,
they said at the very beginning, Nate Carlucci said that this is not a conversation about policy. This is a conversation about the questions that we asked and some of the parcels that we submitted that needed some sort of consideration or relief. It was not a policy conversation at all. They didn't even bring up classification. He simply said we weren't talking about policy today. So at that point, we discussed the matter that they were willing to discuss.
Did they give you, we asked them to consider a 10% plan, an adjacent community plan, when it was submitted on Monday. Mm-hmm. And you're saying that they made no reference whatsoever to whether they will accept that or not?
They're still reviewing it. That's what they told us. They're still reviewing the plan.
Okay. And all the districts. Okay, so welcome. Zoe,
everyone.
And Matthew and JT? I'm not sure who is on the team.
So I think we have, is Matthew. I'm not seeing Matthew yet on the list here. Okay. So we can, I think, go ahead and get started. Maybe JT, do you mind messaging him on the side and checking if he's already on and just waiting in the wings? And I will go ahead and jump in. So for those of you who may be newer to these meetings, my name is Zoe Mueller. I'm a project manager and senior planner with UTEAL. And we've been supporting the planning board as they've been exploring all of the different iterations of this process. And I'm joined by JT, my colleague, who has been doing a lot of the analysis work that's required to bring forth the decision-making input that everyone needs. And that's Matthew as well, who's just joined, who is the principal in charge of this effort and trained as an architect, so brings that level of sort of close scrutiny of the built environment to this effort. So I think with that, I will go ahead and start sharing slides and just kind of move through what we have for you today. I thought we could start with relaying some of what we heard from EOHLC. I will remind everyone that this is not a final determination. They were very courteous in providing us feedback on a very tight timeline. So this was directional feedback to help us reach a decision together tonight. And as was mentioned, the feedback we got was not, they were not able to give us a definitive decision on whether they would be able to consider an adjacent community plan as presented, but they did provide us the feedback necessary for us to make decisions about individual districts that affect both the adjacent community plan and the rapid transit community plan. So we will present those clarifications so everybody understands kind of the base that we're working from, and then we'll go into the rapid transit compliance scenarios that the planning board workshopped together at the previous meeting and that Cheryl had sort of done some initial legwork on to hopefully spark a conversation that can get us to more clarity around that, that scenario. Okay, so this is kind of what I was just talking through. So we'll start with the questions that we asked of EOHLC. We'll relay the analysis that we've done on the rapid transit community plan, and we'll finish as needed to reference the adjacent community plan as shared with EOHLC based on our prior work together. I guess it was earlier last week. And then we'll finish with next steps just to make sure that we're all moving efficiently as a team, because we do need to get to a warrant by the 13th. So we have just a few days remaining. So this is that overall timeline. So we're working towards the warrant being, finalized, going out on the 16th, which means the content of it really needs to be buttoned up on the 13th. And that's enough lead time for a town meeting vote on the 16th of June. These are the clarification questions that we asked of the state. And you'll see for this kind of, what we shared with them initially. So there were kind of 3 categories of clarification questions that we asked about. The first grouping relative to site access sort of nuances. It is required that all parcels that are being zoned under this initiative have public access. So we needed to make sure that these would kind of clear that concern. And then there were several exceptions that we were seeking from the 5-acre minimum that is part of the regulations. 2 that are, really like distinct isolated sites, and 3 that had other kind of slightly different contexts. And then we were also pursuing some relief on the mandatory mixed use limits. So that's, for those who are a little new to the nomenclature, that's districts where you are requiring commercial or mixed use, typically on a ground floor, in addition to allowing housing. This is something that initially was not allowed at all under the law, but then they revised to allow for up to 25% of your multifamily unit capacity to come from districts that are mandatory mixed use ones. And we were seeing if there was an opportunity to expand that beyond the 25% limit, with particular consideration to the Milton Station area and to East Milton Square. So I'll just go through these kind of one by one. For Randolph Ave and Access Road, this was a positive outcome. They were comfortable. They need, further documentation to make a final determination. So that's something we'll continue working with them on. But based on what we were able to relay to them, they indicated that they felt it was a good strategy and that we could, this access was sufficient for the 3 parcels that have a private access easement already, and that it's reasonable to assume that could be extended to the site that we had previously excluded because it does not currently have an access easement. We also, based on the planning board's request at the previous meeting, did look into kind of what it would look like to maybe expand this geography to include the properties that line Randolph Avenue. And what we were looking at there is, what would it take to maintain the kind of the role that this district is playing from a density perspective, and in terms of the overall compliance picture on these smaller parcels. And so what that looked like is about 5 to 6 units per parcel here. So that these sort of more kind of single family home patterning parcels, if you can imagine kind of each of those being able to build 5 to 6 units. That's kind of what we would project these would need to be able to carry in order for it to make sense to expand the district to include them. So we can return to that later on, but just while we're looking at this, the sort of map graphic, I wanted to sort of relay that update as well. The next one was the paper mill site. This was one of the ones that had both an access issue as well as seeking an exception from the 5-acre minimum. In this case, the access didn't seem to be a concern based on what we shared so far. Again, they would need to see further documentation of that to make a final determination. But there was, I realized that's an error on my part. That's pulled over from the prior slide. This was a pretty quick turnaround time for us, so apologies if there's any other elements like that. They suggested that this was, in terms of the 5-acre minimum, that they would need to kind of run that up the ladder and consider it more closely. But worst comes to worst, we could potentially just expand the district in this direction to include this parcel that lines the riverfront. And that would, in part because a lot of this is density denominator deduction, so area that is undevelopable for kind of natural systems reasons, that would therefore mean that it would not negatively impact density as much as it might otherwise. So we're confident that we can, move forward with this, and that over the course of the time between, say, a town vote and the point where UHLC is reviewing this, that we can work with UHLC to resolve any remaining discrepancies on this. So we're advising that at this point we continue with this geometry and plan to work out any finer points with the state as part of the subsequent review, detailed review process that they'll go through once a final approach is submitted to them following the town vote. In the case of Granite Ave North, they indicated they would likely make this exception to the 5-acre minimum because there is truly no other parcel that could be joined up with this one apart from the one we had already studied and discarded because it is not eligible. And so they recognize that there's really no other option here that would be a good faith option. And so they indicated that was likely to be accepted. So that's similarly, we would suggest continuing to retain this as part of the overall strategy. For the East Milton Square site, this is a more subtle one. So this was a request for an exception from the 5-acre minimum. It's quite small and obviously is more continuous with the parcel fabric around it. So it cannot make use of the same arguments that could be made for the paper mill and Granite Ave sites. But if this was used as a mandatory mixed use district, it would not be subject to the 5-acre minimum rule because mandatory mixed use districts are treated essentially as an offset. So it's offsetting a certain amount of unit capacity that you're being required to meet by recognizing unit capacity that exists within mandatory mixed use districts. So that is kind of a pathway we only met with the state a few hours ago. And so we had previously, based on our visibility into the process, expected that this would not be accepted. And so we did not include it in our subsequent analysis. We'll walk through that with you in a moment. But this is, if it's decided that there's a desire to reintegrate this into the approach, it would really have to be a mandatory mixed-use district, which I imagine is what the planning board would prefer anyway. St. Pius, we did relay to, checked in with the state because it was, while it was not below the minimum, it was kind of a unique condition. They indicated there was no barriers from their perspective. The decision really sits with the planning board. And I believe that the planning board has already decided to move on from this site. So we don't need to kind of belabor that one. Ice House site, the state indicated they were not likely to make an exception to the 5-acre minimum for this because it is contiguous with residential fabric to the south. So they would want to see us combine this with the residential parcels that immediately abut it to the south along Blue Hills Parkway in order for them to consider it as a district. And given, I think we discussed that a little bit previously, and there wasn't a desire to do that. So I would suggest discarding this from further consideration. Next, onto the mandatory mixed use. So this in the Milton Station area or Milton Village, Lower Mill, depending on how you refer to it. This we had discussed previously, I think on Jim's initial suggestion, looking at expanding the current mandatory mixed use district along Adams Street with some of these slightly larger parcels that are on the east side. And the state indicated that, certainly they, would support that expansion, but that in terms of getting relief from the overall mandatory mixed use offset percentage limit, that 25% limit that I mentioned before, they think that is unlikely because that is something that communities all over the Commonwealth have asked for, and they don't feel that Milton has a unique enough condition to merit providing relief from Milton that would not also apply across the board to all communities. So it's not to say there's no path forward, but I don't think it's worth us anchoring our strategy to an assumption that we can get relief from the mandatory mixed use limit.
So if I could, just so we don't lose track of some of these things that we might want to have some further, discussion on to explain that there was lengthy discussion on all of these. What Zoe just explained was their initial reaction. And then we had an opportunity, including Nick Milano, to describe the uniqueness of Milton, the uniqueness of Milton Village, the beneficial reasons that we should. The conversation ended on this particular topic with Nate Carlucci and his team listening and going back to higher levels within the state to see if they can grant approval. So I just want to make sure we don't present it as a door closed, Zoe. The conversation.
Yes, I do.
Yeah.
I agree. And I would say, in the case of the paper mill and Granite Ave, based on the level of indication we got from them, I would recommend moving forward with those because I think any remaining issues can be resolved in the time remaining and we have enough clarity for it to not be a gamble. I think in the case of the mandatory mixed use limit, I agree with you, Sean, that they did, with all of these, if you present an argument that's really compelling and is very clearly specific to your community, that is requiring you, making you go through a hardship that is unique relative to the region as a whole, and all the other communities that are subject to these rules, they are always interested in seeing and hearing and considering those unique considerations. I just don't think in the time remaining with the response we got that it's worth relying on that. I think it's a little bit of a gamble.
Did you see Nate's email from 6:05?
We got, I think JT and I were wrapping up the last email, so I think, Matthew, you may have read it more closely than we were able to in the time we had.
It was indicating that districts that are used for mandatory mixed use do not need to meet the 5-acre minimum. That's what he confirmed.
Right.
So that's why the East Milton Square site is now an area that we could consider if we feel that what we present tonight needs further refinement.
Did you calculate, just while we're on this, were you able to calculate the percentage over the 25% that it would exceed? Like how close would we be on? If we did
we were
include.
not able to in the time we had.
Oh, okay, yeah. Because
But
I think
we can as a follow-up to tonight.
Okay.
What we have for you tonight is based on the direction that we got via email from the planning board's prior discussions. We have the compliance approaches, alternatives that for you to consider. And then if there's further refinements to that, we're happy to address those in the time remaining. And we're also happy to do supplemental analysis to support your arguments to the state beyond that compliance approach.
Okay.
Okay.
Zoe, at some point, maybe after you finish presenting everything that was discussed today, I would like to go back and look at the ice house and see, you know, how we might be able to expand to get to 5 acres. So if you put that
I think
on
there's
your-
just one more slide here, which
Okay.
is East Milton Square. So this is the other area that we were, raising in the context of the mandatory mixed use discussion, because obviously this is an area of town that you would only want to zone if it was as mandatory mixed use. And because it's, relatively large, it's not real. We don't think it's likely that you could zone this in a way that would fit within the mandatory mixed use offset and still be able to take advantage of the Milton Station districts that you have. So this is, I think, if there's an argument to be made to the state, I would say it's about the unique quality of the commercial that you have along the Mattapan Trolley and East Milton Square in relationship to that. Because realistically, the place where you could use that additional mandatory mixed use is here. And that's what we're avoiding in the current approach because it's not permissible under the current limits.
Great.
So I think with that, we can return to any of the sort of other districts. I would, Sean, if you're open to it, I would suggest maybe that I present the compliance options and then we return to, if there's so that we can think about other districts in the context of any deficiencies that you see in the compliance approach that we have for you tonight.
Sure, that's fine.
Okay. I think they'll play different roles depending on what issues you're seeing with what we have for you. So this is just before we get into kind of like the detailed tables and maps. This is kind of what we deduced from what we received. So on the left, I think Cheryl had done some initial analysis to bring this to the planning board for discussion. And so on the left, we have that kind of in the shorthand that we've been using for these districts. I'm using Adams as a shorthand for that extension of the Milton Station or Milton Village, Lower Mills area along Adams to the south on the east side of the street. And then the other stations are largely, as we've discussed them before, but the Elliott Street corridor has some geographical refinements that are present in all of the options we're presenting tonight, and I'll show you that map in just a moment. And then, as I understand it, after the further discussion with the planning board, you looked at a refinement to bring the Elliott Street corridor parameters down, with the same geography, but bringing it down to 3-unit limit across the board. So not allowing 4 units on those larger parcel sizes of 10,000 and above, and applying that same rule change to the Fairmount Station commuter rail district. And then also adding in East Milton Square 40B and Woodmere. Before running this scheme, because we had not yet had the benefit of speaking to EOHLC, we preemptively removed the East Milton Square 40B site because based on our understanding, we thought it was very unlikely that would be an area that was the state would consider, so that we've now have updated guidance on that and we can reconsider it. And then Woodmere, given the unit counts that were shared and how close you are on density, we felt that would not be an asset for your overall approach. Again, we're happy to return to that if it's a priority, but that was our recommendation to sort of be able to stay close to your unit numbers and the overall density that you need to hit. So I'll show you what this looks like in terms of what we've run, and then I'm happy to go back and discuss refinements and questions and potential additions with the districts that we've seen before. So this is the basic map change. So the sort of circles are showing, where we've made additions, subtractions. So you can see the Fairmount Station district showing up here. Blue Hills remains as is, the Blue Hills Parkway district without what we've kind of referred to as the triplex expansions of that. The Mattapan Station or Blue Hill Ave Station district remains as is. Elliott changes in several important ways. What we've been referring to as Elliott West or the Columbines has been removed, as has what we refer to as Elliott East, which is just south of Valley Road stop there. And then we've expanded along Central Avenue, so the area that's closest to the Central Ave stop. So kind of shifting the units that were previously, more along the center and west of Elliott, more towards the Central Ave stop, and moving along Central Ave itself and not just Elliott. The other sort of map change that was made is adding an expansion in the mandatory mixed use sort of districts that cluster around Milton Station, again, also known as Milton Village or Lower Mills by folks. So those are the map changes that are consistent across all of the scenarios we're going to show you tonight. And I think the spirit of this is kind of trying to be mindful about the distribution of units across the town. And I just wanted to give kind of a visual of two other districts that were raised. So Woodmere, which is about 8.4 acres, currently has, I believe, 36 units. If we were to kind of zone it at a level that would kind of help us maintain our density overall, that would be 126 units. There was also some discussion of the Hillside Street collection of parcels. That's 5.4 acres roughly, so we need to be at around 81 units there to be in line with the densities that we're trying to maintain. Okay, so this is the modifications that we made to just give you a sense of the color coding that you're seeing here. Yellow cells are ones where we have increased either FAR, units per acre, that allow us to generate more units in that site, on those sites.
Zoe, can you increase the size of that just for everybody here? As much as you can?
I don't think I can without losing some of the information. I could pan to different parts of it potentially.
Okay.
Is there any way to increase the zoom on your side?
Our guys are looking at it.
Yeah, team's looking at it.
Okay.
You could change the orientation.
So while we wait for that, I'll just give you a sense of the color coding. So the yellow is places where we've increased parameters in some way, such that we're generating more units. Green are ones where we've decreased units by virtue of changing some parameters, or in some cases changing parameters down to align with other parameters, so we're more consistent across the board. And then the red ones here are like the new districts that we have added into the mix, and the blue here is representing their geographies have changed here. So if you're comparing it to prior iterations of this work, it's a different geography than what we had before, even though we're using the same name for the district. And then you'll see on the bottom, we've summarized the sort of like some groupings of districts so that people can have a clearer sense of how this stacks up across like the distribution across the town, kind of where the units are going, beyond just thinking in like individual districts, but thinking more in that like a neighborhood scale. So the Fairmount Station area, including the paper mill site and the Fairmount Station district in that number. The Blue Hills, I'm including both the Mattapan Station district and the Blue Hills Parkway corridor district. Elliott Street corridor is just the 3 tiers within the Elliott Street corridor. Milton Village is all of the Milton Station districts here, East, West, Adams, and Bridge. And the East Milton total is really just Granite Ave North at this point.
So a question, in that tier 3, does that include the Central Ave addition in the Elliott
Yes.
Street Blue? Okay.
Yeah, so that's embedded in these numbers. So it's distributed across these tiers.
Okay, thanks.
And we did check that all of the parameter changes that we made here that you're seeing in green and yellow and blue, those are to align with the target numbers that the planning board had shared with us. So in some cases we're like 1 unit or 2 units off in one direction or another, but we did try to very closely match the unit targets that you had shared with us based on modifying parameters to align with those. Any questions on this one before we go to the next? We have 3 scenarios for you tonight. Okay.
So sorry, one question. Are we at our maximum of what we can do on paper mill, on the paper mill site?
Essentially, yes. Because the paper mill is quite constrained, and JT, you may be able to speak to this with more specificity. Essentially, what we're starting to see is that the 30% limit and the FAR and units per acre, we're getting to the point where we can increase the units per acre, but it doesn't have any effect. We increase the units per acre and FAR, it doesn't have any effect. We did release, I neglected to mention, for both Granite Ave North and the paper mill site. We previously had, for Granite Ave North, a 1.5 parking spaces maximum. We've released those parking constraints on these 2 because that was really what was we couldn't get any more units out of them if we retained those parking requirements. So that was necessary to get to these numbers. It was not possible to do that with the 1.5 parking space maximum.
So I do have another question for you before you move on, and this it probably applies to all of them. The FAR, how does that influencing the zone capacity? We know it's influencing the size of the buildings, but how is it influencing the zone capacity?
Yeah, so it's sort of for each of these, the 3 things, or I guess I would say the parameters that we're showing here are generally the ones that are having the greatest impact. And for many of the districts, FAR and units per acre kind of will toggle between which one is the more controlling one. In other words, which is setting the lower limit. So in some of these, they're very sensitive to FAR because that is really the thing that's controlling the capacity. In other cases, like the open space is the primary driver of the limit, or the units per acre is the primary driver. So it shifts a little bit for each, but some of them are quite sensitive to FAR. I don't know if that really answered your question, Cheryl.
Is it possible to have more tiers of FAR within the Elliott Street corridor?
So we did see that suggestion that you had shared, and we're happy to do that. We just didn't have time to do it for tonight. But in both the Elliott Street corridor and the Fairmount Station, we certainly could introduce more of a sliding scale of more gradations. I think you had mentioned maybe every 2,500 square feet of lot area change that you have an adjusted FAR expectation to just avoid, allowing really massive buildings as the parcel sizes approach the next tier, but haven't yet reached the next tier.
Right. Great. Thank you.
And can I ask a question on the paper mill site and on the Granite Ave North? I know we reduced it from 40% open space to 30%, but both of those sites actually have quite a bit of green space surrounding it. Would it make sense to try and reduce that the open space on those 2 lots even further?
think on the Granite Avenue North, and please correct me, GT, if I'm wrong, I think we discovered that the open space was not determinative. And to get more units there, we had to increase the FAR and the units per acre.
That was on Granite Ave North.
Yes.
North. Randolph, Paper Mill is going to be a similar dynamic. I can pull the open space percent down further, but the limiting factor really is FAR and units per acre for both of these. They're single sites, right? With you know, the same kind of dynamic.
Yeah, so basically, but previously when the planning board had shared with us in the context of the adjacent community plan, an openness to go down to 30% on these, we did do that change, but it didn't change the unit numbers we were getting. So we also made some adjustments to FAR and units per acre to get to the unit numbers that you were hoping to get from those. So that's really for these, any further changes that we want to make, if you want to get more units out of them, would really be about changing the units per acre and the FAR.
Do you have a sense of whether you could do it without having an increase in height at this point? I mean, would an increase in the density or the FAR do it, or would you have to allow more height?
It might work.
I'm not advocating necessarily for more height. I'm just wondering if that's going to be the controlling factor at some point.
We didn't push it much harder beyond what was sort of asked in terms of a target number, but given that we're getting credit for the non-developable wetlands and tidal areas in terms of open space, and that we have eliminated any parking maximums or minimums, it is possible that we could get those numbers up with FAR and units per acre.
And I think we do feel comfortable not exceeding 6 stories.
Right.
Yeah.
I was just wondering if that was going to
if they could get more
be
units.
the next thing that tripped or becoming the controlling factor, and how much more you could actually do in adjusting
I think
density.
when we had the parking spaces, we would have hit that situation you're describing, Cheryl, much earlier, because the parking spaces are dealt with as if they're surface parking. So in other words, the parking is controlling the building footprint. And so in that context, you really need to go higher in order to get more units. But releasing the parking constraints makes it a little bit more flexible to stay at the 6 stories.
And then can you explain, I'm sorry, Maggie, were you done with that question?
Yeah, I was just going to ask, I'm not advocating for 7 stories because I would hate to set a precedent. But the paper mill site does sit below grade. So how many stories would it appear from grade level if we went up to 7 stories? If it's going to relieve some pressure off another district.
Should we
I think it depends. Probably depends how the building is sited. There's, if memory serves, there's a little bit of grade change across the site. And a lot of those lower areas are not developable.
Not the way, the Milton Station area really, extra space storage.
I'm anticipating actually in both of these, where floodplain may be, that you're going to have an elevated first floor and you're probably parking underneath. So you're going to end up with 5 floors of occupied and 1 floor of parking, given these sites. So whether you would actually hit these numbers or not is questionable.
Okay.
I think it's difficult.
I'm sorry, Matthew, go ahead.
I think it's difficult on the paper mill site.
Okay.
And again, the model's thinking it doesn't need to supply parking, but development in the site will have to supply parking. And that will be the limiting factor when somebody really sits down to design.
Agreed. I had a question on something else now, if you're done with that, okay. On the Milton Station Adams, the zoned, the unit capacity of 32, can you explain how you arrived at that?
Yeah, so we were, this is a case where like we can keep playing to get closer to those numbers, but it was really like this. So let me back up. So we started from just overall for all of these districts, we've been holding to the 40% open space. We talked about setting a 3.5 height limit, and we talked about holding the kind of one parking space expectation to kind of be consistent with those other districts. So that kind of left us with the two remaining controlling factors were units per acre and FAR. I think the number that was initially shared was 47 as a potential number that could go in this district. So we could keep modifying like the FAR and the units per acre to get to that 47. But it's the combination of these two that got us to that. And so we were trying to keep the FAR as low as we could. This FAR is lower, really. I think maybe it's best, Matthew, if you speak to this, but I think we did the work to kind of confirm that the current FAR was on most of these sites was probably above 0.8 already.
Yeah, the two bigger sites, it just appears to be definitely above 1, just because the sites are very small and the buildings are dense. But I think this could go up to 1. And probably not even exceed the existing physical density.
Yeah, again, the open space here too with the waterfront right behind it and the park right behind it, 40% I think is high given this exact location.
I was going to ask, do we know what the existing open space is now?
A lot less than that on.
Yeah, definitely.
There's a parking lot.
The Verizon building has some land in back that drops off. That's probably, you could count as open space, but the other two parcels, I don't think.
Yeah, so if we look at what's existing, now we're all sort of comfortable with because we're used to it. So could we reduce that? What would that do?
I would raise the FAR and reduce the open space and get it closer to that 47, I think, myself.
Yeah, as long as it doesn't have to change the height, building height.
Mm-hmm. We can definitely make those adjustments. Let's go through all of them, and then we can kind of focus in on some of these changes, which I suspect might be changes that we would make kind of globally across the board. No matter which of these 3 changes. So it sounds like there's interest in having, exploring getting more out of Granite Ave North and Paper Mill.
Sorry about that.
And is there a unit number that you have in mind for that?
Sorry, for which one, Zoe?
For the
Granite Ave and Paper Mill.
I think find the upper limit for us,
I think keeping the height at 6 stories though.
Yeah,
And
I agree
and
with
the upper
that.
limit with 30% open space, no minimum parking requirement.
And I know the model takes into account, I think, 1,000 square foot per unit. Would we ever reduce that?
We can't.
I don't think we can.
We can't reduce the assumption of 1,000 1,000 square feet per unit, but what we have been doing is trying to very closely match the units per acre in the FAR so that between the two of them, they are effectively requiring that future development in order to maximize the number of units would need to build an average of 1,000 square foot units or less. But they wouldn't be able to build any more units. They would just be building, smaller square footage units.
Remember, that's gross, so that includes hallways, stairways, not just
Right.
what within a unit itself. And
Yes,
on
that's a
buildings
good
of this
reminder, too.
size, there's going to be multiple stairs and corridors.
It's probably more like an average of something below 800 square feet per unit at best.
Great. I think we can go on to the next.
Great, so this one is based on the planning board's discussion, kind of evolving from Cheryl's initial suggestion, as I understand it. And the main change here is for the Elliott Street corridor and for Fairmount Station, dropping it down to 3 unit per lot maximum across the board. And it's the same modified geography, so we've removed east and west like sub areas. In other words, the Columbines in the area sort of south of Elliott Street that was previously included, and we have expanded along Central Ave. So that geography holds true across all those scenarios we're going to show you tonight. And this is really looking at, reducing that Elliott Street corridor and Fairmount Station, and then as needed, absorbing it elsewhere. This, and as a reminder, we did not include the East Milton 40B or Woodmere. We didn't include Woodmere because we thought it would drag down density. We didn't include East Milton Square 40B because we were not optimistic about the state being open to that. So this is representing this sort of reduced number of districts. You can see the slightly different distribution across the bottom here. Unfortunately, this does come just shy of your unit capacity target. So we looked at some changes to Milton Station West in particular, because these parameters are pretty significantly reduced from what we've shown on that on the Milton Station West previously. So we just did some small adjustments just to get up to the minimum unit capacity that we needed to be at here in order to get that to hit that number. So I think from the discussions that we've heard recently, this is probably the version that represents the most even distribution across Elliott Street and these other areas of the options we've considered recently, and it does hold all of the Elliott Street corridor to 3 units per lot, which hopefully is a little bit more comfortable for folks. And there might be other ways that we can make up that unit number difference. Like we could absorb those, units a little bit in the Milton Station Adams expansion, like we just talked about, instead of having that increase happen in the Milton Station West. We could have some of that increase happen in Granite Ave North and Paper Mill, but I wanted to see for the planning board as a whole, where within this distribution, if anywhere you see kind of a concern, and what potential solutions do you see to that to get the balance where you want it to be?
Zoe, can you just toggle back for a moment? You were at 24, 25 with that change from 4 units to 3 units. What did we have previously on the first?
The first one is 2524, so.
Okay, 99 units.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I just added those 3 on the last slide, the 336, the 156, and the 63 for a total of 555, whereas
Yeah,
what
so
passed.
that's at the bottom.
Yeah, okay, yep, sorry.
No, it's all good.
Yeah, so can you go back? Yeah, so that 555 as compared to 480 is what it was and what passed in 2023, just for folks who are watching. So it is, even with, Zoe, can you just explain again, maybe because there's people who are new to watching this, I think it was what we were trying to do was achieve a little bit of a rebalance in the high and the low in the density, so that by allowing the lot size to go down to 6,000 rather than 7,500, it's not making the density such that you have to really increase it at a greater level in other places. Can you just run through that a little bit, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm forgetting for the moment, maybe Matthew or JT, you could look this up. In the 2023 article, we just cleared the density across the town, but we did so with more units than your minimum unit target because there were some districts, particularly the Elliott Street corridor, that were quite low density. And so in order to not just hit your, minimum units, but to also hit your density, you needed to exceed the overall number of units you were delivering to compensate for those density issues. And so for the Elliott Street corridor, a lot of the density challenges were coming from two main factors. One was that a lot of smaller parcels were being excluded. So there were no units that were allowable on those parcels. And then on the other side, for the larger lots, you weren't getting enough units out of those larger lots to reach the densities that you needed to reach. So this, at that point, we also had a 7,500 square foot minimum lot size. So the main change that you're seeing here from the 2023 article for the Elliott Street corridor is really the change of that minimum lot size for the smallest parcel size tier. So that we're capturing more of the actual pattern of parcels that exists in Elliott and not having quite so many that are excluded from 3-unit development. So that helps with the density overall, which then means for the town as a whole, you don't have to have many dense districts to compensate for the low density of the Elliott Street corridor, meaning that overall you can ride very close to your targets across the board versus having to exceed the unit capacity in order to reach your density.
And then, thank you, Zoe. One other thing, just again for people who are watching and here. There have been a lot of folks who have emailed the board and talked about in the 2023, 57% of the zone capacity was in the, between the Milton Station East all the way across to the Blue Hills Parkway, including all of those districts. And in this scenario that's on the screen, do you have a calculation which shows what that calculation would be with this scenario?
It would be these middle 3 boxes. So I don't have that, the number handy, but we can calculate it quite quickly.
And we should maybe.
So this is now 66%, but the balance of where that's occurring is more heavily weighted towards Milton Village, I believe, than it was before.
And that
so closer to your main commercial area and more mandatory mixed use versus before.
Okay.
And that will be offset when we can add back the East Milton parcel.
Okay.
Because that can be 100 units there.
And the ice house?
And we'll talk, we haven't got.
We'll get there.
We can potentially include the ice house, which also would take that off of, change that percentage.
Zoe, just again, looking at this, the Fairmount, the 159, that's based on 3 units a parcel?
Yes. Okay. So you can see the change from it was at 185 when we had the tiering rules from Elliott that included 4 units on lots that were 10,000 square feet or more. So when we bring it all down to just 3 units per lot across the board, it goes from 185 to 159 for the Fairmount Station District, which is under the same rule set.
And how many parcels is that?
The Fairmount Station District, maybe JT, you might be able to answer that more quickly than I can.
It is, I think, 52 parcels, Maggie, around there, just above 50.
So maybe we could even reduce the size of partially that, if we.
And I just had another. Another question, the Mattapan station at 183 hasn't changed since the 2023?
Yeah.
And did we think that there was a little bit more room there?
So we did look into that a little bit when we were looking for ways to kind of, get a few more units out of some of the districts where the density makes sense. So the Mattapan station has a really unique rule set because it has the Unquity House parcel in the back, but then it also has a handful of small parcels that are more akin to the pattern on Elliott Street or Blue Hills Parkway that line it. And so right now it has a rule set that requires a 5,000 square foot minimum lot size and then 1,000 square foot of additional lot size for every additional unit. And that is the thing that's controlling right now. So in order to get more units out of that district, we would need to change that minimum lot size formula. And that's, I think, quite important from what we've heard in the past of, how the planning board would want to see that developed.
Okay. I know we included the smaller parcels next to it so that we could reach the minimum district size, but we didn't want those to actually be part of development. So I wouldn't want to change it to change that parameter. Thank you. And then the Blue Hills Parkway, just again, for folks who've been concerned about that, that's a very slight change, from before, right?
So that is unchanged from 2023.
Okay.
It's just the same exact geography, the same exact rules. We had studied 2 different expansion areas to the east and to the west. But that was not included in our analysis for tonight, based on the direction that we received. So this is unchanged. There's no new expanded districts within the Blue Hills area.
Okay, so as far as like what we would want to, I think the third option is the start, or is the pace of which we should continue to work off. Do you agree? This is the third one, right? Which brings it to 3 in all 3 tiers.
I think this is just the second.
It says
Yeah.
V2.
This is the
It's
second.
the second or the third?
I don't know.
Yeah, naming is a little confusing. So we have the initial version that we ran from your guidance, Cheryl, and then we have 2 versions from the planning board discussion. So this is the third overall and the second of the planning board discussion.
Okay, I thought it was third overall, yeah.
This is the one that they made the change so we could get back to 2461 because of the loss of the 99 units from 4 to 3.
Got it.
Yeah.
Correct, yeah.
Yeah, so I guess this is the sort of point at
Second
which
modified.
We're
that
getting
we should be
closer.
work off of from any more modifications would come off of this as the baseline, right?
I think so.
Okay.
So maybe we've heard, I think, 4 ideas at this point of like modifications, the Milton Station, Adams to make those modifications to get it closer to get it to 47 units versus 32. We heard about some modifications for Granite Avenue North and Paper Mill, and then the East Milton 40B and the Ice House were both mentioned. So all of those would be like increasing units. So I want to understand where you want to see units reduced. Like these are all ways of creating flexibility by adding units elsewhere. What problem are you trying to solve in making those modifications?
So,
go ahead.
sorry. So could you break down the Randolph Ave and Access Road? You still have it at 123.
Yeah, that was based on the notes that we had from the last planning board meeting. I know that there was still some ongoing discussion about that, so that's certainly a place where we could, if we wanted to find some units in another part of town, we could bring that down.
So it's 40 units for the 40B that's there. And then we talked about another 40 for the horse farm. And then how many units were created from the other houses along Randolph Ave? How many properties times 3 units per property?
So we did not add those additional parcels in. We did do the analysis of what it would take. So I think that's kind of an open question to this group is in order for them to maintain, let me go back to that slide 1 second. Okay, so the first time we looked at this year, we looked at 80 units across all of these 4 parcels in sort of the middle of the block here. So if we take that as kind of a cue point of like a level of density that works for the overall picture, and look at how could we maintain that density in this area if we were expanding to these sites, they would need to be at like 5 or 6 units per parcel for that to play the same role in the overall compliance approach. If we wanted to have this district overall be at a even lower density than the 80 units, we would need to be increasing units elsewhere to compensate for that reduction. So that's kind of a question to the planning board is like, is this a solution that you're interested in? And, where would you want to increase to compensate for that?
So what's the acreage of the horse farm section of this district?
I don't know that offhand, but perhaps JT, you could do a quick tally and.
Cheryl, which part of it?
Well, the 40B is that lower parcel and
about 1 acre.
And that has the 40 units already. I'm concerned about having 40 units on the acreage above if it drops it below 15 units an acre, because then it's just not contributing anymore. It needs to at least have 15 units an acre in order to contribute. And so I don't know what that acreage is, so I don't know what the unit count would have to be. I suspect it's more than 40.
Yeah, so if the total acreage, so this is, not just the parcels, but also the spanning the private way that's in between them. So we have it at 6.6 acres. So if the 40B parcel is around 1 acre, that would imply that the rest of this is around 5.6, including the right-of-way.
So probably 50 units.
Plus the 40, right? So
it'd be,
it has to be 5.6 times 15.
What'd you say, 6.6?
40. It's got to be the 124 to contribute.
No, but with the 40B.
6.6.
6.6 divided, 80 divided by 6.6. So if you took the 6.6 and divided by 80 units, that's 12.12 units. So it's almost there.
So I think you need, if you said you want to do on average, you want to spread those out, I think you still need 60 at a minimum in order for it to contribute. Because what you would do is you take the 6.6 times the 15, and that would 6.6 acres times the 15 gives you 99. You subtract 40 from it, which is what's already there, and it gives you 59. So you need at least 60 in order for it to contribute. I really think this is an opportunity to be at more than 15 units an acre. As the 7-Eleven across the street at 20 units an acre, 20.5 I think it was. This could have a greater setback at the, whatever might be called the front, which would be towards Randolph Ave, so that you put it further to the back, away from the single families. But the golf course and the access road and the animal shelter are what's at the back. So I think that would be a way to, and what height did we have on this sub-district?
I believe we were at 2.5 in this part of town. Can you double check that for me, JT, on the other slides?
Yeah, Randolph and Access is 2.5, as well as 7-Eleven.
Right, so the 40B is what, 4 or 5 stories? So 2.5 stories is what houses are. If the open space, if you made a large enough front yard setback, I really don't see why you would drop this that much.
Well, on our April 24th meeting, we had it at 102 units,
Mm-hmm.
and it came out at 16.7. You know, I'm okay with that.
102?
Yeah.
Okay. And right now you have
I would
it,
be
they
too-
have it at
I think that's-
123?
Yes,
There's already
120.
there's already 40, yeah.
102, because there's already 40.
Well,
so you're adding
that includes the
60.
40.
That includes,
Yeah,
so it would be 60 on top of the 40.
yes.
What's it, it
To
has to
go
be 60
where
on
it says
top of the
combined
40 to
ownership.
contribute.
And so you're saying not doing the properties in front?
Correct.
Well, it seems to drag it down with that whole density denominator thing, right? That's the feeling
Yeah.
I'm getting. It's just too much land, unless we go 5 or 6 units per parcel.
I would be fine with that. I think that's
What are you fine with, Meredith?
going to 60. So 102, is that what you said?
Yeah, whatever we
Which
had on
was
the
a
April 24th
16
meeting.
It was a,
So it would be a drop of 21 then from what is here.
Yeah.
So if we're going from 32 to 47 in Milton Station, and you're dropping 21 here,
and remember,
So yeah, if we're going from 32 to 47, that would cover a decent
Yeah.
amount of that reduction in Randolph Ave and Access Road, but not in its entirety.
Not the entirety.
It also wouldn't, one of the other important things to remember is that the mandatory mixed use districts don't factor into the density calculation. So they're useful when you're trying to make up a unit gap, but they're not useful when you're trying to make up a density gap.
right, okay. But if we said,
we also have to remember, if we are factoring in the East Milton Square 40B project and the Ice House project, that's going to bring up our denominator for density.
but the problem is would have to be mandatory mixed use in East Milton, which is the same problem as what we were just talking about in Adams Street, right, Zoe?
I think the density still would
Falcone would have to be mandatory mixed use?
because it's less than
Yeah.
5 acres. Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so I think the way I would think of the East Milton Square site, the East Milton 40B, the way it can contribute is if you want to reduce units in the other mandatory mixed use districts. So for instance, the Milton Station, East West, and the Adams expansion we've been considering, you could make that, you could use the East Milton Square 40B to shift those units out of the Milton Village, Milton Station districts that are mandatory mixed use, just to distribute it around the town more. But it would be plugging in the same way.
If you think about the Milton Village, when we did the mixed-use overlay, we said it had access to walkable amenities. You can walk to a grocery store, et cetera. And you also have the trolley, and you also have the bike path. And we're talking about a small amount added at that Adams Street. So I wouldn't take those out just so we can add the Falcone building in, because it's otherwise not contributing in other ways. Do I understand that correctly, Zoe?
Yeah, so it won't help you with density. It can only help you with units because it's small enough that the only way that, from what we understand from today, the only way that it would be considered as eligible is if it is a mandatory mixed use district, because it is so small and it's so contiguous with the parcel fabric around it.
So in that case, we have to be higher density someplace, not dropping the density like we're talking about with 711 Randolph Ave.
Yeah,
If
so
we
I
wanted to
feel
add
like
that.
I'm beating a dead horse. Again, back from a planning perspective, Randolph Ave, it has 0 amenities. You can't walk anywhere. The sidewalks are terrible. The state doesn't care for it. It's one of the most deadliest roads in the state. And I just don't think it follows any logical planning. So I'm against increasing this area up to your 102 units. I've been a firm 80 unit person on this parcel.
I just think, as I've said before, that this parcel is going to get redeveloped. And if we zone it at a level that's not attractive, I believe the alternative would be another 40B there.
And that might happen anyway, unfortunately.
Well, if we zone it at a level that's not enough to, they'll do the 40B route. Obviously, if the zoning is in place that is as of right, that gives them an attractive alternative, that's a better route than the 40B. The permitting would be faster. I mean, maybe not if we set deadlines on the site plan approval for ourselves, right?
No,
It
yeah,
would
I'm just
come
saying
to
there's
us.
no guarantee it won't go 40B. I'm not saying that's a reason not to do anything with it. I think we should take advantage of that parcel. I'm just saying that we always have 40B looming over every project in town. That's all I'm saying.
And I would hope that the developer of the 40B, which is 40 units on 1 acre, perhaps would actually create a new plan which would take advantage of possibly all of it and not concentrate 40 units on that 1 acre. So now you'd have 80 units on 6.5 acres.
Not going to happen. I understand what you'd like to see, but they've already got that entitled, right? I mean,
They do.
you know, Jim,
Yeah.
if it's entitled for that.
Yeah.
Yep,
Um,
we know.
So can I ask you though, that notion about where the front yard, or where the front yard setback would be here? The front yard's considered Randolph Ave or the access road?
So this is a point we actually just have been discussing internally. So because the compliance model is not very responsive to setbacks, for some of these newer districts, we haven't yet made recommendations about setbacks, but we will do so. And Matthew has started to give that some thought. We haven't, I think, reached a setback suggestion for this district yet, but we certainly can. And if there's something that you have in mind, we're happy to, roll that in.
But given what you understand about the frontage or the access on this, where would you see the definition of the frontage being
Yeah, it's a
here?
good question. I mean, I think perhaps from a design perspective, and Matthew, I'd welcome your opinion on this. It's just my first reaction is it's not a public frontage, but I feel that in terms of the way that the parcels are fronting, that for the 40B parcel, it would be Randolph Ave, and for the other parcels, the private way would be functioning more like a front than the portions of the parcel that abut the rear yards of the parcels on Randolph. But I don't know what your first reaction would be, Matthew.
Well, we don't, you can craft the zoning to define what each edge is, right? So we can target edges that abut, the district to the west. We can also experiment with, what is a good setback generally. We could apply the same setback to every side just to make the issue go away. That very slender parcel gets a little tricky and it might get flagged, even though it's under combined ownership. That might become a sort of point of discussion. But to the extent that we can pick a front
Okay,
in the zoning language.
okay.
I mean, I would think right now the front is off Randolph Ave, the access road, that's town-owned property.
Yeah.
So you couldn't really consider,
Well, I'm just thinking in terms of making sure that you could get a setback that you define to be, greater, and you would say for the purposes of the setbacks or whatever, that the front yard is deemed to be Randolph Ave, and then that's
Yeah.
where your setback is, right?
Yeah, you just can spell it out. I want to just, because we're talking about generally reducing units in some places and then where we would increase. I've done a little bit of math, and so long as the acreage is constant in these two schemes, and I think we're working with a 127 acre density denominator for both these schemes. If I do the math and multiply that by 15, we can probably absorb around 40 additional mandatory mixed use units somewhere and reduce that same number in the non-MMU portions.
Okay.
So we could apply that reduction here, Matthew?
If that's where you wanted to reduce it, yes. I mean, we'd have to talk about where you want to increase it, if it may be adding the parcel on East Milton Square, right?
Yeah.
Or increasing the density in the newer MMU sort of district in Milton Village.
Yeah, so for instance, like if you were to get the Adams, I'm just doing some live numbers. I haven't figured out what the parameters would need to be at to get to these numbers. But if you, in Milton Station West, had that plugged in at 193 and had the Adams expansion of the Milton Village area at 47, like you had discussed, that would bring you to, and let me drop the Randolph Haven Access Road. That's with Randolph Haven Access Road at 102, you're still clearing your 46, your unit target. Let's see what it would be at 80, you drop just below that, but at like
90 units?
Yeah, it might be about that. Yeah, I think about 102 is as low as you can get Randolph Haven Access Road, just with that, like, increased units in the mandatory mixed use districts. So you might need to do a little bit more. So we talked about Granite Ave North and Paper Mill. So if you got a little bit more units out of those two sites, that might give you enough to bring the Randolph Haven Access Road down below 102.
Zoe, does that consider including the 40B site in East Milton or not?
Right now, it does not. The calculations I was just running.
I think we should include it.
I think
I'd like to, if we could try to include that parcel in East Milton Square, I think that would be great.
Let me see if I can.
Would you be able to do those calculations tonight?
Yeah, let me see if I can do I'm gonna have to verify this afterwards, but let me see if I can do a crude calculation here. It's 1.2 acres. Can you check for me, JT? I don't think there's any density denominator for this
There's
deduction, right?
no, they're not down there in East Milton Square.
I think right now, is it being zoned for 90 units? 90 units right now
Is approved.
are approved there.
93, I think.
92. 92.
92.
Get credit for
So if you
everyone.
get,
Yeah.
so if we had, even with a first floor mandatory mixed use.
Yeah, but
I
they
think
don't have commercial there now.
Doesn't matter though.
It doesn't matter, it's zoning, so it's, but it still would be a lot of units, I think, that we would get credit for.
Yes, so that does allow you to shift units from like within the mandatory mixed use districts, but it does not give you any extra wiggle room on density, and that's what you're starting to hit up against. So so like I said before, I think, you know, it can play a role if your goal is to reduce the number of units in your Milton Village area. The East Milton 40B can help you accomplish that, but that's pretty much the only thing that it can help you with.
How many units can we accomplish in East Milton?
I just put 90 in there as a placeholder because it's close to the number of units that have been proposed on the site. But I can plug in a different number.
Can you go higher?
Yeah, but I think before I do that, like, what's the goal? Like, is the goal to take units away from Milton Village?
Yes, that'd be my goal.
Okay. So how many, let's see, how, I mean, there isn't like, at some point, I'm sure we will hit an abstract limit on this, but this is not a constrained collection of parcels in terms of like, you know, density denominator deductions or, you know, other regulations like the way Granite Ave and Paper Mill. So I think it might be easier to think about it in terms of like, you know, if you zone it, basically like how many units do you think you're comfortable with here? And then we can reduce the Milton Village ones by that amount.
Zoe, you could zone it for whatever number we want to zone it. It's under construction.
I would go a little bit high, I mean,
But I think the more you go, I think you're going to, if I'm understanding correctly, we're going to have to go more than the 2461 in order to get to our density of 15 units an acre. Is that right, Zoe?
So it will, yes, so right now, so for instance, I just plugged in the 90, and let me see if we're still fine on the cap for mandatory mixed use districts, but even with this change right now, I can't reduce the units anywhere else in town because the density is at 15 flat. And I'm at 2,570 units versus the 2,461 that you're required. So this is the problem with having too many units in the mandatory mixed use.
so the only thing that I was going to say, and I know we all have disagreements, is, and I haven't seen the map on the Elliott Street corridor, but that's what's dragging us down, that Elliott Street, because it's 3 units per lot. So
It's like an 8.8 density at one point, I think I saw.
we could possibly look at just refining some of that Elliott Street corridor to not be dragging our density down. Is that correct, Zoe?
Let me look at what the balance is right now. So
Before
right
you-
now.
And I don't know, and I'm just looking at what
But I
else would be
think
bringing
before
those
you
numbers
did
down.
that, why wouldn't you remove the Adams Village units if you absolutely want to include the 40B in East Milton? Because you're swapping the same unit types.
We may. I'd like to hear the answer to Meredith's question.
Right now, your lowest density districts are Elliott Street and Fairmount, and then Blue Hills, those are all your smaller parcel fabric districts.
So maybe we don't need Fairmount.
That is a big number to lose,
159.
and it's,
Okay, all right. So maybe we,
and it's also, for the, the broader goal of distribution, like it's, right, like geographically, it's helping to make this, balance out the overall distribution of units. If that drops out, we're gonna have to make up those units in the more concentrated districts elsewhere.
do you have a map of just the Elliott Street, the corridor, not the section in teal or turquoise?
Yeah, we don't have it
It might
like
be helpful
in
to
a
see
zoomed
where we
in
are.
setting, but let me do a quick.
Map.
Meredith, can we also talk about the density in Tier 3? Is it 5.4 in Tier 3? That's the lowest density. Yeah.
But what are we trying to solve here? If we could go back to like what has been presented as a compliant plan, what is it that you're trying to change? What is it that you're uncomfortable with? We're just talking about tinkering with things, but what are we trying to fix?
I'm examining every option that's out there. I still want to talk about the other ones that we haven't got to yet, the Ice House. I want to talk about 507 Randolph Ave. We're at a
And you
critical point.
recognize that we're due to submit an article for.
I do.
It has to go
I
to
do.
print. So when do you
Tuesday.
expect that we're going to submit it?
We're going to be on Tuesday. We have to make a decision.
And we're going to have to have the
We
language
have-
written too.
We have about, I would say, 8 hours of staff time to produce any revisions you have for us. We are committed to this, but we're not all pulling all-nighters for 5 nights in a row to get this done. So there's 8 hours of our collective work time across 3 people to get you all of the numbers and the shape files that you need to do this. So we can absolutely do tweaks, but we cannot exhaustively study every remaining alternative. We can do targeted tweaks to achieve a goal.
I'd like to suggest that we go back to the one that works, the third, or the planning board version 2, and take public comment at this point. Otherwise, I think we're just going around in circles and continuing to, this could be studied and studied and studied for years.
Public comment
We're
while
not ready yet.
UTIL's still here. I think we
I'd
should
like to have UTIL be able to answer any questions people might have. We've had one public forum on this, and we have a deadline coming up, and we have an opportunity to see if anybody wants to ask questions or provide any feedback on what they've seen. I don't see why we shouldn't take it.
I was addressing getting the unit count and the density for the East Milton and how we would do that. That's what I
But
was
we don't
addressing.
need it right now, it's not in this plan. So I'd like to go back and look at the,
So you don't want to include the 40B in East Milton?
I'd like to look at it again and see what it is that we're trying to correct or make different or somehow, because otherwise it's just talking about alternatives.
Okay, well,
Where-
I
where-
want Randolph Ave lower.
So what we said was we could take 21 units out of Randolph Ave, right? And that would
So
solve
we can
that.
get it, we can get the Randolph Ave with just sort of the other numbers that we have elsewhere from the base that we were presenting, and just increasing some of the mandatory mixed use numbers. That enabled us to get Randolph Ave and Access Road down to 102. To further reduce it, we've exhausted the degree to which our mandatory mixed use districts can help us to achieve that reduction. At this point, to achieve that reduction, we'd need to increase the density of other districts without adding new acreage.
If tier 3 was 4, that's the 15,000 square foot and greater, can you just plot that and see what that would look like? Would that help us? Right now, it's 5.4.
So if you go back to Cheryl's test, that number there.
Yeah, I'll grab that. Thank you. That's a good.
And have we discussed 270 Hillside yet?
It was 80, she did do a test, and it's 81 units.
And does that have
So-
to be mandatory mixed use? Or can that just be straight units?
Straight.
Yeah, so
What's
if
the
we
density? I'm sorry.
if we brought the tier 3 of Elliott Street corridor to 4 units, that would enable us to get Randolph Ave and Access Road down to 80 units. I will point out, however, that in the distribution of parcels right now, Elliott Street corridor is already carrying the most units, the second only to Milton Village. So if we're going to increase somewhere, I would suggest looking at some of the other options, given the volume of feedback we've heard.
I don't think we want to do 4 units.
No, and I don't think we want to increase the capacity there. And
And that
This-
705 in Milton Village, can that be reduced by adding the 40B in East Milton?
yes.
We should do it.
Absolutely.
So we would be taking off the Adams.
Removing the Adams and instead including East Milton.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that makes
Yeah.
sense.
And is there a limit on East Milton?
Would you do 1?
I think at some point you will start to invite HLC to challenge you on something as a,
Yeah, I was thinking about 100 units. Maybe, but-
Well, the 7-Eleven 40B, which is 90 units as well, we have it at 131. Isn't that sort of similar to East Milton?
so for reference, I just swapped out I deleted the Adams extension, and you still can't get Randolph Ave and Access Road down to 80 with that substitution. So we still need to, we can do that swap. I think that's a fine swap, for the mandatory mixed use issue, but we still need to, increase units, I think, elsewhere to enable, it sounds like right now that the two things that we're trying to do is we're trying to reduce a little bit the Milton Village and reduce the Randolph Ave and Access Road, and to find units for that elsewhere, including the East Milton 40B to help with the Milton Station reduction. And the things that have been raised already are the paper mill site and Granite Ave North.
And why haven't we discussed 270 Hillside? Is it because you have to recuse?
On the
If
Randolph,
you add acreage at
that
this
the only
point,
reason
it will
why?
not help. You will need to zone that at more than 15 units per acre. So unless you are comfortable collectively as a board with 81 units on that site, it's not worth discussing.
So I'm okay with 81 units on that site.
I would like to say that we need to keep to something. We're very close to something. We have a very tight deadline.
Okay.
Then we're not going to, the 8 hours we've got left of their time,
We could pay him to
102,
go a little longer, right?
100, sorry?
We could pay him to go a little bit longer.
No,
We have
the-
money in our budget.
No, it's our
No,
deadline
but
for
the
the
deadline's the
warrant.
deadline.
Yeah.
You've had, I'm sorry, you've had ample time to enable us to do this within working hours. I'm not pulling all-nighters to close the gap here.
We're not
agree, we
asking
agree.
you,
Saying
Zoe,
go into
that's
next
fine.
week. It's all right, it's fine.
So my concern is Smith Road. So I would like to see Smith Road off this. Fairmount Ave, 52 parcels. Do we really need 52 parcels? Smith Road has
That's part
larger-
of our distribution beyond the Elliott Street corridor. And we're already at, what did we say in total in the Elliott Street corridor? And Milton Village? We're at it.
It's coming down because we are going to take that 705 down by at least 100, but at least that corridor area is going to come down.
And, you know, the planning logic of a half a mile width of a commuter rail station and at the same parameters as the Elliott Street corridor is absolutely sound planning. And, you know, picking streets that we like or don't like is not sound planning. You know, this district works. It works the same way the Elliott Street districts work, and it's the same kind of, people say that the commuter rail is far better transit access than the trolley is. In fact, it is very good.
Yeah, I'm not saying all the parcels on Fairmount. I'm just saying the larger parcels on Smith Road.
So Zoe and UTIL team, you looked at those parcels?
Does that give
Because
us
there
the
was a
5 acres? That's the question. Did you include those because it equals 5 acres?
It was within the half mile, and then
Okay.
They look bigger.
So maybe,
52 parcels seems larger than 5 acres.
yeah, so
What's the acreage on Fairmont?
pulling the large parcels on Smith Road, that might help us actually with our density.
Where is it?
it's at,
Is it 15.7?
it's a lot at 11.8 there. So it's not a problem at 3 units, and 11.8, that's, I'm not sure that it would help.
We could just run that as just a test for agreeing that if we keep Fairmont in because it does contribute.
And if,
Size.
I mean, Randolph Avenue Access Road, back to that for a moment, that can't be less than 102 to contribute. We want to count the 40Bs. If that's a consistent goal, then I think we can, the minor modification of what we talked about with the MMUs, removing Adams and adding East Milton Square, if we took 21 units off of Randolph Ave and we found that in the Paper Mill and Granite Ave North, I think that's very doable, reasonable, and we can actually begin to work on the zoning language, which is a fair amount of work for Tuesday, and so that we could vote that on Tuesday.
Yep, and I talked to Nick about that, and really the language, most of the zoning language will be the same for what he's already developed for the 10% plan, would be the same for the 25% plan. It would be the plugging in of these calculations.
It still takes
So if
time
we-
to do, and we still have to review
Yes,
it and vote on it.
And a lot of it, Nick is, I talked to him, he's comfortable that he can get that done for Tuesday.
Can we,
Making a decision tonight.
We have to make the decision tonight on the districts, and then we can have those tweaked slightly.
I mean, I think
Based
we
on
could go with this, and it still could be tweaked. These modifications could be done between now and
I agree,
town
but
meeting.
I do want to talk about the Ice House
I do too.
property.
Yeah.
But I agree that these right now would be the districts that I would suggest that we include. And then we look at how we, toggle those numbers on the calculations of each one. And
So this
and
is
while-
what's being called PB discussion concept V2.
yeah. So are we good saying generally these are the zoning districts that we're comfortable with? We're not looking to add in, I think Woodmere,
So
she explained.
triplex is out.
So triplex is out. Yep, I think,
I'm good with this.
yeah,
I'm good with this, but I do wanna-
there's two I have an interest in. I have an interest in the Ice House, and I definitely have an interest in 507 Randolph Ave. I don't think we should just ignore that.
And 501 Randolph Ave, which we talked about.
501?
Randolph Ave, we talked about today.
But I don't
Milton
see that.
Academy.
I
I
don't
don't see that
think,
happening in 8 hours and
I-
getting it done.
and I think that's probably, I talked to Nick a little bit more about that. Unfortunately, I think that's most likely not going to be allowed by HLC.
I still think I would
I mean,
include
we
it
can
anyway.
advocate for it, but I think, I don't think we can rely on it being able to,
I'm not
to
sure
get
you
that.
can rely on everything.
no,
right?
I know.
There's,
But I do feel, I do want to look at the, can we take a look at the ice house? And then we'll talk about.
Yeah, let me just give you a quick, I have a scheme that I think is working within all of the constraints you've just described. I'm just deleting the parameters that I haven't been able to update
Okay.
and showing you the numbers here. This would be at 80. And then we have Milton Station replacing this with East Milton Square 40B. We don't have any parameters for that, and I will point out that the height in this case will be a limit because the current 90 units that is being shown on the site is quite tight to the site's capacity.
So can we
So
do it?
the changes that I've made are Granite Ave North is up to 250. I haven't figured out what the parameters would need to be to achieve that. East Milton Square I have at 90, replacing the Adams. These stay at the numbers they're at, as does Paper Mill. And then we have the total then would come to 2479. And again, we'll do all of the cross-checking to make sure that this is lining up, and this is at 15.0. And then the balance of what we're seeing is this remains at 338, Blue Hills remains at the same number, Elliott remains at the same number, Milton Village drops down to 673, and East Milton gets to 340, which is just adding in the 40B site as well as the Granite Ave North increase. So this would be a revised working scheme that I think is satisfying most of the criteria that have been discussed, but I think if there are issues that you still see in this set of numbers, I think that would be the only rationale for exploring additional districts is if they help improve a problem you are still seeing in this set of numbers.
And you haven't calculated the net new for each district?
We have not.
I did a calculation based on it's roughly what we've been looking at here, just under 1,600 net new.
So but by district?
I had it by district in what I sent out based on these numbers. These numbers have shifted a little bit, but the numbers of existing in these areas are not shifted. So the existing units that I calculated in all the areas that were in this were 876.
So just on the Elliott Street corridor, where we've taken out the Cliff Road and Norway area, can you pull that map up, Zoe? Because when I'm looking at this, I'm concerned about assemblage of properties. Could we bring that Cliff Road, sort of the border of that area, could we run that up to include Allen Circle? If you can see, I don't know if you can see it, it looks like a little horseshoe. Because I worry about that being a potential for assemblage, just the way it's.
Remember, assemblage is not going to help.
Well,
because you still are limited on your lot. So if you have one lot of 6,000 and you have you add another lot of 6,000, you combine them
all
for
about the same.
12,000, then you still can only build 3 units.
I still would like to I would like to sort of expand that, and I think we will have the unit count, and it may help us, so. It's not that large of an area.
This,
Yeah.
you're thinking like Norway Road here?
Yeah, so
Sorry, I'm not
expanding
quite
that
following.
along Elliott Street corridor just a little bit.
So pulling the
widening-
Elliott Street corridor up to include both sides of Norway Road?
Yeah, both sides of Norway Road, but then, and then continuing along Elliott Street, still keeping that front, sort of the way we did in the reduction plan on Elliott.
So you'd have to cut across Capon and take some out of Capon, or just jump to Allen Circle?
I think we,
Is
I think we'd
this
have to
what
take
you
some out of
mean?
Capon, yeah.
Like adding that to Elliott?
No, actually,
no,
I think
taking-
subtracting. I'm sorry.
Subtracting it, sorry.
It's already subtracted.
Oh, so a
So
little,
going up, yeah. But
a
if
little
you,
north of that, northeast of that is
Going
a street
northeast,
called-
like along the
Yeah,
trolley
right there,
there?
keep
Yeah.
going, that, right there.
Along Capon?
Capon,
the right
and then
of
a little
Capon.
farther. Along,
this
yeah, right
area
there,
here?
right there.
What's the thinking or the logic behind it?
it's, again, I'm trying to take as much off of
But we have, can we go
more
back
of
to
on
totals?
Elliott, and
But then we start to
very
have
dense.
to,
it's very dense, but we might, if we can do it, and we don't need the units, I just,
Well, so according to Cheryl's map on Elliott's net news 290, and on Randolph Ave with the 40B at 711, which is 100, and then now you're talking 102 at the access road. That's like 202 new units at the bottom of Randolph Ave, the most dangerous highway in the town, which has no public access, no transit-oriented. So I'm not understanding why you're putting, there's going to be 202 units there and only 290 on Elliott Street.
can we go back to the total again?
well, if people feel they want to keep it in, that's fine. I just didn't know if, in looking at this corridor, it's a very tight
No, and again,
area.
I don't want it anywhere.
I know.
You know, I've been a pretty firm. I don't want it
really
in
tight, yeah.
necessarily in my neighborhood. I don't want it in anybody else's neighborhood. But if we're going to go back, as I've always said for these past 3 years, you look at the statute, and it's transit-oriented development. It just doesn't make sense to me to only have 290 net new units on Elliott Street, and you're putting 200 on Randolph Ave.
Well, you have empty parcels on Randolph Ave, and you have single-family and two-family homes in the Elliott Street corridor.
No, I understand
You have a
all
four-lane
that.
road compared to
Yeah.
a two-lane narrow road with connecting
Which,
roads.
which
That's where the
there's
T is the
casualties on Randolph Ave. The Randolph Ave is closed. Like, I don't think you guys understand how dangerous Randolph Ave is. It is so dangerous. And now you're gonna be putting like that 40B at 711. The school bus has to stop on Randolph Ave to pick up any
Well,
kids.
they're already putting the 40Bs in this
I
location,
understand,
so it's
but
happening.
to me, this
where
is,
they're-
this is
It is-
reckless and this is dangerous.
Well, I'm not trying to add more units to that. I'm just trying to take off some of our single-family.
Can we
homes.
just look at the summary again, just
Yeah, yeah.
go from the map back to the summary to see where we are?
We can tweak that. Zoe can look at that independently, but.
So this has 336 in the Tier 1, and the existing Elliott Street in the Tier 1 is 135. That's a large increase in the Elliott Street corridor for just the Tier 1 on a narrow two-lane road, Maggie. So I think that
I mean, I'm not arguing it's not.
Yeah,
No.
okay.
I'm not arguing it's not. I'm arguing that Randolph Ave is a deadly highway.
Well, we
So-
haven't looked at the ice house yet, and we haven't looked at,
We don't really have room to remove at 2,479. of zone capacity. We're a lot less, really, comparatively, than in the 2023 scheme.
And as everyone
scenario.
has said for the past 3 years, it's just zoning. And so the likelihood of zoning single-family neighborhoods, as everyone has said for the past 3 years, is reduced. The likelihood of this being built on Randolph Ave is greatly, greatly going to happen. There's already two 40Bs there. We know that there's going to be more. So if we go back to all the arguments everybody has made for the past 3 years, it's just zoning. So why not?
And Randolph Ave is a very long street. It covers just a lot of area, so it does get spread out.
And there's a traffic light at the intersection with the access road here. So in terms of people being able to come in and out, the access presumably could come off the access road like the 40B is. So you're at a signalized intersection to be able to come in and out there.
And one single homeowner paid to get that access for that 40B. One single homeowner.
No, when the zoning was put in place for assisted living on the horse farm, that zoning was written with that traffic light and that access from the access road in mind. So there's already, when we think about when we put our priorities, like what parcels should we zone for, we said commercial properties, larger properties that were underutilized. This is one of those underutilized properties that will get redeveloped. And whether we want to wish that it wouldn't.
I know all that. We know all of that. We don't have to reiterate it.
So let's keep moving, because I'd like to be through by 10.
Can we look at the ice house?
Yeah. Zoe, can you pull up what we would have to do to include the ice house?
Yeah, so let me skip back to this. And I think if I'm understanding the conversation correctly, the purpose that the ice house would be serving would be to reduce pressure on or to replace Randolph Ave access road. That seems to be the remaining sticking point. Am I reading that correctly?
Yeah, reduce pressure. If we can do it, let's reduce it someplace.
So this is it's currently 2 acres. So, you can kind of proportionally see, you'd basically need to be expanding along the residential to the south to get to a 5-acre number.
Yeah.
So if this is 2 acres, that would be, at least a handful of these. And I might suggest it seems like this is an access road, maybe for the driveways for these homes or something, but maybe that would be a logical break point if you were going to include parcels to the south.
Move your cursor. I want to see where your cursor is. Are you drawing? Oh, right
to
there.
right here.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
So for Zoe, for those to contribute, just like Randolph Ave, they'd have to be at least 15 units an acre, right?
Yeah, so I mean, right now, if we look at our, the role that Randolph Ave and Access Road is playing, so if we're swapping it in for that, in effect, that is at 13.1 units per acre. That's 6.6 acres. So I think you'd need to see something pretty analogous to those stats to get to the, what we'd need to see for this to contribute. So like something close to 80 units, something close to 6 acres.
Zoe, how many parcels are there all the way down to Canton Ave? We can't see Canton Ave on the...
Yeah, maybe JT, you could do a quick look at on GIS how many parcels.
Down until it hits the intersection?
Yeah, Canton Ave, JT.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15.
So I don't think we want to include all of them.
And you need at least the parcels that extend down to that little right of way to hit 5.
So there'd be another 10 parcels left.
So this would be the only place where we'd be rezoning single family to 15 units an acre.
Which seems high. Very.
We're not doing it.
And this is, as I've said, it's a DCR road. It's a way through a park, is designed
There's going to be a new school,
Charles
presumably.
Elliott. You know, there's
Yeah,
historical
I know.
significance on this road. And even though I'm really against Randolph Ave, I'm against this too. We abut conservation land.
Yeah, I think that's too high of a
I
density for
don't think
single
that
family.
We can't go the other direction.
No.
No. How many units are in the ice house?
50 something.
On 2 acres?
2.2, it's 2.2 acres, right? Or 2 acres?
I have 2 from our notes previously.
It's about 2 on the dot.
So I was assuming we would just use the ice house and get some kind of an exception?
We can't.
It's not
They
gonna-
won't allow that. It needs to be 5 acres or they won't allow the ice house.
All right.
So, but it's,
I'm not in favor of 5 acres of.
I'm not
I'm
either.
not in
Carving out
favor.
5 acres in this area.
Yeah. All right, thank you for just taking a look at that.
Yeah, of course. So I think then we are, I think that's the balance of the additional sites that we
Says.
wanted to explore.
Low-hanging fruit at this point.
Yeah, I mean, given the constraints that we have on time. So I, just in my quick calculations, I put the additional units that we needed on the Granite Ave North site versus Paper Mill, which seemed like the other candidate to accomplish that same goal. Is there a preference between those two? And I don't know, Matthew, if you also have opinions in terms of, development, feasibility, or kind of the constraints of those parcels where we should be zoning for more.
Yeah, which 2 parcels?
Between Granite Ave North and Paper Mill, if one of them is absorbing, basically,
Yeah.
18 additional units from what we were showing before, whether those 18 additional units are going on Granite Ave North or Paper Mill.
I would pick Grand Avenue North. I think the Paper Mill site is complex. I think if you start pushing those numbers higher on Paper Mill, I mean, if I were HLC, it's going to start to look a little bit sketchy, given the access issues and the topography and everything there. So
I think Granite Ave North makes sense.
yeah, and we know from the conversation today, they're good with Granite Ave North. I don't think it's going to face the level of, further scrutiny that the paper mill will face. So we should put it there. I agree with Matthew.
Great. So I think the last thing I'd like a little bit of input on is for the East Milton 40B, the parameters that you'd like to see there. And JT, maybe while they're talking, if you can try to do a rough and ready compliance workbook for this so that we can test. My concern is that the parameters that we're going to need to put in to get to 90 are going to be parameters that you're not comfortable with. So I just want to see if we can quickly stress test those to make sure that we're okay.
In the meantime, just to update you guys on the parameters necessary for 250 on Granite Ave North, that's 66 units per acre with a FAR of 1.55.
Great, thanks for pulling those numbers, JT. It's helpful to have that added context.
I just wanted to point out with this change, the 362 at Blue Hills, 555 at Elliott Street Quarter at Milton Village at 673. That's a total of 1590, or 64% of the total zone capacity. So it did drop down from 66 to 64 if we take out the Adams Village portion and move it to East Milton Square.
All right,
Good.
I'm good with that.
I like it. It's better. Let me correct myself. I don't like any of this, but I like that change.
Understood.
Okay, so for the East Milton 40B, if I recall correctly, your overlay zone is the height that you're setting is it 3 or 2.5?
3.
3. So I'd imagine you'd want to match that for the 40B site. In other words, you wouldn't want to go higher than 3.
Yes, I think so.
I imagine you might want to go lower than 3 if we can manage it.
Yeah.
And then parking spaces also at 1. So we've been showing kind of everywhere else, or would you want to exempt in this location?
I think exempt, so it doesn't control it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think exempt.
Exempt on that? Yep. I think.
Minimum lot size and units per lot requirements. I'm imagining we can potentially ignore those 2 constraints, not use them. Just focus on FAR units per acre and stories and open space. Does that sound right?
Yep.
I don't think it's a business district, so I don't think a large amount of open space. What did we have in 2023 for East Milton? Do you recall, Zoe?
Let me see if I can pull that up quickly.
It's very little, I think, too.
It's almost,
It's 60%.
We required 60%?
Open space?
It was 2023, East Milton Square was at 60%.
That was
Oh,
all
no,
the
I'm
square.
sorry.
Because it was the whole square.
It was the whole
Okay.
square.
Well,
No,
I
it
don't
wasn't.
think-
Sorry, it's not on this table.
I would say we could put it at 30% maybe, so we try it at 30%.
Here, I'm like moments away from finding this. Okay, East Milton Square, we had open space. Yeah, we had it at 40%.
It's 40, yep.
Yeah. So we were lining up with the rest of these, the parameters we're showing elsewhere, but as you point out, it was the square as a whole, and I think the intent was to also encourage people to use the overlay in lieu of the
Correct, yeah.
MBTA communities. So that may have been one of the ways that we were trying to make the overlay appealing. So I think the current parameters for the 40B, the open space is quite low. I imagine that might not be what the planning board is looking for, but let me do a quick check to just give you an anchor point to what it is in the application currently. The open space is about a little under 5% right now in the application. Could do
So I think we could,
10%.
yeah, 10,
That'd be fine.
I'd be fine with that.
And then for FAR and units per acre, I imagine for units per acre, we might just toggle that to get to where we need to be, but is there for FAR, is there any kind of strong feeling you have in terms of like alignment with the zoning you've been working on?
I'd say do what works.
I would say you could toggle with it and see.
Okay.
what
So
you
let's give that a try. I imagine you may still need some more time, JT, to pull set up all the parcels and the acreage and all of that. Let me see if I can get you the other stats that we had for it.
Why don't we start with units per acre and then just calibrate the FAR accordingly based on 1,000 square feet per unit?
Yeah.
Sounds good.
I guess if it's 1.2, I just want to see if at a very basic level, if we have 1.2 acres, and you can only use 90% of that floor area, and you can only go to 3 stories.
Must have left my phone in the truck.
So that would, okay, we're in the clear. We can figure it out from there. So if you were to just extrude you know, 90% lot coverage straight up for 3 stories on this size, you would get like around 140 units. So I just wanted to make sure that we could, like, the envelope that you're willing to consider, that we could get 90 within that. So we'll toggle the, you know, the FAR and the units per acre to bring it down into alignment with 90.
Okay.
But I think maybe Matthew, you can do a quick check on my math there to make sure that I'm not missing.
Yeah, it's going to be like FAR, something like 1.7 or something, or 1.8. It's going to be higher than anywhere else.
I think that's fine.
The FAR of the 40B is higher than that, right? So
I think the current FAR of the 40B is above 2.
that's what I thought.
What's the reason to toggle down to 90? Why not go as many as we possibly can?
I mean, I think unless there's a place where I think there's 2 reasons. The first is just like inviting increased scrutiny from the state. But I think besides that, it's just, what are we achieving with it? Like, where are we reducing elsewhere? What is the goal that we're trying to achieve by creating, increased units here? What are we opening? What are we trying to do elsewhere?
It just
by
reduced.
virtue of-
How many units are in the village right now?
The village has 673.
Just imagine what that looks like. 673 units. Anything you can do to reduce that number is a good thing. That's a
So what would
tremendous
we be
number of
willing
units.
to-
Remember, 88 Wharf is included in that, and it's a condo building, so you would need every condo owner to agree to do anything there. So it's a
Pardon me?
paper number.
I agree, but still, it's, how many units are in 88 Wharf?
77.
Pardon me?
77.
Just imagine. Thank you. Thank
And
you.
I do worry about the potential of extra space storage. Something could happen there, and we only have a 2-year demolition. I would hate to lose, I've said before, any of those mill buildings down
Yeah,
there.
I mean-
I
So as
want to
long-
see it added to, but
I'm
not.
okay going more than 90 as long as it's not going to kick it out of acceptability.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
But I don't want to bring the scrutiny to the point that we lose it.
Right.
But let's not
Zoe,
just.
what do you think would be what would be a recommendation? Like 110, would that seem?
I think I'm going to punt to Matthew on this because it's more of a built form threshold question of when it starts to be infeasible
I
or
mean,
like unlikely.
you have a proposal there. I'm sorry, how many units is the proposal? 90?
92.
92.
Yeah, you could get, I mean, the proof is that at 3 stories or higher?
I think it's
Higher.
5.
It's higher.
6.
It's 5.
6.
6? It's either 5 or 6.
Oh, okay.
It's a varying level lot, so.
With,
Well-
You can't,
with
the
one
model
level.
won't let you get to, just to update, the model won't let you get to 90 at 3 stories. You need to go at least to 3.5.
All right,
Regardless
I
of
think
what
I would be
you-
willing to do that,
3.5 is okay.
or 4.
But if you want to go more than 90, you're going to have to go higher.
You have to
What I'm
4 or
hearing.
5.
It's never going to be built. It's under construction. You could call it 4. It's never going to happen.
But I'm just saying, from what it sounds like, we're going to have to go more
Oh,
than
right,
you
yeah,
have
it's
to
the
go more than
model-
90.
I understand. Yeah.
The model builds in the 20% open space. That's what's happening, I think, because of the setbacks that typically are required. So that's, I think, what's happening. So effectively, it's really an 80% lot coverage
There you go.
is.
So if you want 5 stories, how many units would that be?
Give me one sec, Cheryl. I just realized we're removing all open space, right?
Yeah, and no parking
Yeah, I
requirement,
think-
right?
And
I think 10% open
10% open
space
space, yeah.
requirement.
Yeah,
And no parking requirement, correct?
yeah.
Correct. So I think at this point, the parameters would just be the 3 stories and the 10% open space, and then that would be our limit. But I don't know if the compliance model might still default to the 20 just
More than 3.
to preserve
Yeah.
setback
I would
allowance.
say go higher on the height with that if you. if you could.
Okay.
Yeah, can do. Is it giving you with the 10% plugged in for open space, is it still
I've
shy of
removed
90?
I removed any limits on units per acre just so I can see what FAR and height is doing. So we get 100 units with 3.5 at 2 FAR. Yeah.
What would
For a
4.5?
moment, just so we're seeing the impact of the stories, can you release the FAR constraint for a second and see if like 3 stories can get their period just with the 10% and the 3 stories?
Yeah.
And then from there, we can start increasing
Yeah.
height.
119 is the cap.
Okay.
That's the cap on.
On 3 stories without any FAR limitations.
Okay.
So what would, I think the questions would be, do we leave it at that, at the, 119, that's as much as we try and get out of the site, because that allows you to stay within
Yeah, that seems.
the 3
What if you
stories.
what if you went 4 stories? Just, could you punch in 4 stories just to see what it is?
Yeah. 160.
Wow.
I'd do it.
You might get them to reconsider what they're building.
I know.
They're going that much more.
I know the guys building it, they're already going. They're not gonna change their plan.
You never know.
I don't think.
They wouldn't have to build any parking under this scenario.
So the difference between 3 and 4 goes from 119 to 160?
At 1,000 square feet a unit.
How about,
big are the units
how
now?
about doing a half story?
Yeah.
What
Try,
was
try the half, 3.5.
3.5?
What's the 3.5? I agree, Cheryl. What's 3.5, JT?
139.
That's what I would do.
That's yeah. I think that's.
So this is my problem with this whole thing. It is basically not good planning at all.
Well, this
It's
is trying to get
just,
credit for a
No, which I
40B.
100% agree. I 100%
And people want us to
agree.
do that.
That's all I'm trying to do.
It's all,
I
that's
understand.
just, but it's not good planning. So everyone just needs to recognize this is not how good planning should be.
Okay.
We have a compliance model that we have to meet
Yeah, I
in
know,
order
a
to do it.
flawed
so.
compliance model, yeah.
So
I know.
if we said 139, how much does that remove? Is that 139 that's removed from
The village.
Milton Village, which would be Milton Station East? And we would be removing Adams, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we could, for instance, we could bring the Milton Village down to 609. Let me bring that, let me get this in context for you. So, make a, so I didn't actually make the edits to the numbers here. So this would be, these hold true, but this, instead of being at 90, this is at 139. And since I'm assuming if we're reducing in the Milton Station area, you'd want to reduce the east
Correct.
one based on the comments you were describing. So if we can bring that down to 265.
And maybe the bridge. We could. That's a really high density up there.
I don't think that we can, because that one's part of what's propping up the density
That's
numbers.
right. That's right. And it's not mandatory mixed use. That's.
Yeah.
So
This would be 464, and then that stays at 15 flat, and then this goes from 673 to 609, so you're losing like 60 some units. And the East Milton goes up because that's where we're adding the balance of those units.
What was the change on East Milton, Zoe? You went.
It went from, let's see, 380, I
It was like 324.
So 340 to 389.
But it only went 49 units?
Yeah, right, because we were at 90 before, and then
Oh,
we increased
okay,
from 90
right,
to
right.
139.
I understand, thank you. I forgot the 90 was in there.
Zoe, is the acreage adjusted?
So the 40B, because it would be MMU, it wouldn't modify acreage.
Of course. Thank you.
And this allows us to hit just almost exactly
Yeah,
the total.
so, given the hour, Meredith, at 9:44,
I would be good. This is
these refinements
good
are
as we're
good.
gonna get.
This is as good as it can get, I think. I mean,
So is the goal to get this approved by HLC before town meeting? Or we
So-
vote on this and then submit it by July
It
14th?
they won't be able to give a formal approval before town meeting, but they will probably, we will be able to get review and feedback from them, I imagine. But I doubt that we will get a formal approval before town meeting, but we will certainly try, and I'm sure they will too. They have been very responsive. We gave them less than a week, and they got us quite extensive feedback.
So if this gets voted in at town meeting and then has to get tweaked, does it have to go back before town meeting to get voted in again?
Yes.
As a final? Yes?
There have been, I believe
I think this is
there was like one or
should be
two other communities that we've worked with where there have been minor
One of our
revisions
two
that have happened
that we sent.
afterwards. I think
This would be the 25.
Cohasset was maybe one of them.
If we say
and
25, this would be the one.
It would be,
When?
the state would
If,
work with
when,
you
yeah.
to figure out the revisions that needed to occur and make sure that, and if they were significant enough that they required going back to town meeting, you would do so, I believe. But we can, I think, I wouldn't focus too much on that piece of it. I think the level of tweaks that happen at that stage, if you've been in communication with the UHLC, are not the kinds of tweaks that residents tend to care about. They're like very technical tweaks that are just important for, dotting I's and crossing T's.
But I think you have to go back to town meeting, because it's zoning. You have to go back to town meeting, even if it's a small tweak.
Yeah, so I think like for instance, we made a small tweak, I think, and you might remember the details better than I do, Matthew, and Cohasset, to address some of their interaction with their groundwater rules. And that did go back to town meeting. But as I said, it's a very technical, like, interaction of different regulations kind of revision. So it's not something that generally is it's not an equally comparable hurdle in terms of bringing something to town meeting as what you're working through right now.
So Zoe, would it throw us out of compliance if we have to go back to town meeting, or does the state just make an exception and say you guys are good?
I think the general policy is that if you've submitted a compliance approach in good faith, it's been voted in by town meeting, and there's a small issue, you have interim compliance status until it's been resolved.
Okay.
It's really what you run into is town meeting doesn't approve it. That's what you run into.
Okay.
So you don't want to have to go back to town meeting.
Yeah, they'll approve it.
Yeah, I mean, I think, so I know the state will do everything they can to help you not be in that situation, but I'm not sure there's much utility to discussing it further because none of us have influence over that. We're all just gonna have to do the best we can in the time we have, and the same is true for the state, and they'll do everything they can to get you what you need so that you have a town meeting that is efficient and productive and you don't have to go back. But there's only so much time, and may or may not happen.
So I'd like to suggest that we authorize UTIL to do the work that they need to do, that, to submit this next week so that it can be submitted to the select board.
And Zoe, can you include net news in all these areas?
We can for the public communications piece, but not on the same timeline as your warrant. So we can work with the town to get that kind of supporting analysis up to help you with the public communications. but we won't be able to do it by the 13th to align with your warrant schedule.
But by town meeting, could you have it done?
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's what I mean.
That's
Like
the public communications part?
many weeks before your town meeting, we will work with you to get that kind of analysis so that you can have an effective public communications campaign. We're happy to work with you on that. The net new is like, there's nuances, so we can talk through the specifics of what that might look like, but we are happy to provide that kind of supporting analysis just on a slightly delayed timeline from the delivery of the components that are critical for the warrant itself.
Okay.
But I do think net new is hugely important.
I understand.
Not just for communication purposes, but we just passed a $10 million override, and it would be huge if of the 2464 units, if 2,000 are net new. Like, we really have to be stewards of
I don't think it's going to be 2,000 based on my
I understand, but I'm just saying it would be nice to know how many net new we're having, because it puts a huge burden on the taxpayers. We just heard from the fire chief, they're 11 personnel short every shift. We only have 6 police every shift. So it is a huge piece of information that I think we need.
Even if it's not 2,000, and you had a calculation earlier, Cheryl, that it was 1,600, it's something like that. But you cannot, and this notion that if you zone it, it's only zoning and never be built, I've never accepted that. I never will accept that. If you zone it, prepare that it's going to be built. If developers can make money, developers build buildings. That's just the way it is. And this eliminates a barrier for them. They'll build it. But, 1,600 units. And, for all those that are so adamantly in favor of complying with the zoning, there's no consideration for infrastructure costs. You're going to have it. You are absolutely going to have it. There's increase in services. We're going to have it. We can't add, those kind of units to the town and not have it. We will have an increase in the number of students. There's no doubt about it. That RKG analysis was flawed. 275 kids into the school system. If you zone for 2,461, that's not a credible number. It ignored the fact that people will move out of their homes and move into these built units, and their homes will then be occupied by families. Why do we want to ignore that? The cost of schools, the capital cost, 1,600 cars on the road in Milton. Maybe it's not 1,600, maybe it's 1,200. 1,000 more cars driving around Milton. It's bad as it is. Nobody wants to consider all that. And, and I've said it, and I'm going to continue to say it, the SJC did not rule on our classification. They did not. They deferred ruling on it. The classification is still out there for Milton. And we have plenty of residents in town that want to state that we lost our case. What they ruled on applied to all 177 communities. The one aspect of our case that they refused to rule on was the one that was only applicable to Milton. Well, go figure, right? They didn't want to touch it, but they told Milton, right? Because every other component of the ruling that they issued applied to all 177, but the one that applied to Milton only, they didn't touch it. So. This is, the fact that the statement that Milton lost, Milton did not lose. And it would only, you can only consider Milton having lost if we do pursue classification, it is adjudicated, and we lose in that particular situation. That's it. Until that happens, Milton has not lost. And this idea that we have is absolutely incorrect. There's plenty of attorneys here in the room. I'm not one. And even I understand that we didn't lose. So
we have a state senator who spoke at town meeting, ready to fight.
Okay.
And the unfunded mandate.
Hold on.
That's the other thing where we're going to lose. If we pass zoning, and then the Plymouth County Superior Court rules that towns can seek an exemption until it's funded, we would lose again on that.
I understand.
I'll close with this. We, all of us, plenty of people in the community, hear criticisms of the previous leaders in Milton because they were not open-minded to 40B, right? We hear that kind of criticism a lot. People talk about that all the time. We're assaulted with developers coming in because they take advantage of 40B. And what happens? the decision-making of leaders years past, is questioned. Just imagine when the negative impacts of this kind of zoning affects Milton, what are they going to say about the leadership of Milton at this time? All of us that said it was a good idea.
Okay, so at this point, I just want to say, I feel strongly that we need to present a 10% plan and a 25% plan, and that we present that to the warrant committee to go to the June town meeting. I think there are a lot of unknowns, to your point, the unfunded mandate. We have not seen the decision on that yet. I think we need to give flexibility. I think we need to be prepared for both, because we don't know what's going to happen with this. But I think we should have both prepared, and if it gets to town meeting, let town meeting decide. But I would suggest, we know the 5% that we all agree on, or the 10% that we all agree on. And I would say what UTL has just prepared for us tonight, with doing a little bit of additional work, would be the plan that I would feel comfortable should we be forced to do a 25%. And that would be the plan that I would want to send to the warrant committee with language that Nick has said that he can prepare for both by Tuesday.
I agree submitting both. That's my opinion.
Okay.
I think we submit both to the warrant committee and put them in a position where they have two plans.
Right.
However, I would like that 10% plan I would like to, some of the changes we made to the 25, I would like to consider making to the 10, right? So I just want to make sure that
I don't think we have time to make changes to the 10, though. We have to write the language. And Nick has already done a draft. I don't know if everyone, I was going to ask, has everyone?
What kind of changes are you talking? Just moving some.
I'd like to look and
computers
see, I'd like to look and see how, some of what we did here tonight could improve the 10.
around? Does that really affect the zoning language if we move numbers around?
I didn't think so, but.
I didn't think so either.
We might be able to change, if you want to look
Yeah.
at some numbers. Sorry,
That's all.
But not districts. We wouldn't be able to get into doing district studies at this point. We would not have time.
So Meredith, to your point of this language, I started to review it, but I felt as if we needed the districts to be finalized.
We do, yeah.
And
So these
so
are the districts
I'm
that I
happy
would-
to look at it more carefully now, once we get this
Yep.
agreed upon and finalized,
Look at what more carefully?
the language of the zoning.
Okay.
So are we in agreement that what we came up with is the best? I just don't see any other options for us.
It's fine. It's as good as we're going to get. I'm not happy with it either, but
Yeah.
that's it. We're here.
Yeah.
All right,
We have
so
8 hours left,
Can I make a
right?
motion?
Yes, you can make a motion.
All right, I'll make a motion to submit a 25% rapid transit compliant plan based upon the final spreadsheet that was shared tonight and manipulated tonight by UTL to the select board and the warrant committee for the June special town meeting.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Abstained.
Abstain. Okay. I understand.
25% makes me sick to my stomach.
I know. Okay. So that, we're in agreement on that, and I think if there's anyone who would like to comment from the public, please, we wanted to offer you the opportunity. But I think hopefully a lot of the concerns that we heard have been addressed. Yes, Tom. Yeah, please come to the table.
Thomas Doherty, Adam Street. This will just take a minute. I have heard many residents over the years, and even some elected officials, talking about that the regulations and the statute of the law. Sorry?
Oh, you just, your name.
Your name and address, please.
Thomas Doherty, Adam Street, Milton.
Yeah, he said it. Okay.
I want to just bring up one point. The regulations and the statute and the regulations are the law, and they apply to HLC just as much as they apply to Milton. And if you look at the statute and the regs, and you just look at one aspect, that's very important. HLC must itself comply with the statute and the regs. The statute requires, quote, at least one district of reasonable size located within a half mile of a subway station or commuter rail station, if applicable. If a community has both a subway station and a commuter rail station, it may choose either because it's only one district. If you were therefore to assume, as the HLC does, or assert, that the trolley is essentially a rapid transit equivalent to a subway station, nevertheless, Milton could still choose under the statute, which uses the word or, to fully comply by virtue of the fact that it will put its district within a half mile of commuter rail stations, subject to the 50-acre minimum, for example, and the permission to locate, under the regs, significant portions elsewhere. Under the regulation 72.081C, drafted by HLC, and HLC is obligated under it. And so take a look at that when you have a chance. Again, I'm sure you have looked at it.
Can you cite the section again, please?
Yep. 72.08 paren 1 paren C.
Okay.
All right? And it says, a community with, I'm quoting, a community with transit station areas associated with more than one transit station may locate the multifamily zoning district in any of the transit station areas. For example, a rapid transit community with transit station area around a subway station in one part of town, comma, and transit station area around a commuter rail station in another part of town may locate its multifamily zoning district in either or both transit station areas. Milton has the choice, therefore, even if you were to assume, as HLC does, that there's a rapid transit subway station proximity that Milton has, it can choose under this reg, HLC's own reg, and the statute, which says either or, to locate its zoning district within a half mile of the commuter rail stations. I just wanted to point that out because I've heard a lot of comments from folks that the statute is the law and the regulations are the law, but they're not looking fully through the alternative within the statute itself and within the reg. Thanks.
Great. Thank you very much. Okay. So I didn't see any other, oh, yes, please, yeah.
Good evening. John Driscoll, 718 Randolph Ave. I've sat through all these meetings at home. It's kind of disturbing. And I hear people explaining Randolph Ave is a 4-lane highway and it's got plenty of room. And then I heard one individual say, well, they can go shop at Eagle Farm, which is a mile up the road with traffic going by doing about 80. So I kind of find it's kind of hard to watch people that live in other areas of town going to decide what's going to go on Randolph Ave. Below my house, last October, a man got killed. Lady drove head-on into him. So it does happen. And everybody here, you can say it's the law, it's law. As far as I'm concerned, I tell the state, we're not going to obey the law. It's going to cost us a lot more than $1.25 million that we didn't get from the state. So I'd say to the state, see you later. It doesn't bother me that we have to say to the state, we're not going to take your grants, fine. But it's kind of hard for other people to dictate what can go in other people's neighborhood. And I spent over 10 grand to get that light used myself. And now it's coming back to haunt me. Thank you.
Yeah, welcome.
Hi, Mark Christo, 17 Waldo Road. Had a number of things to talk about, but I think kind of one of the more important ones is kind of what Sean was alluding to about the classification issue. I'm someone that has always very strongly felt that this is a community that stands alone from every other one of the other 177 communities in this Commonwealth that should be looking at that reclassification option. Knowing that, and knowing that we are working towards a plan, and that doesn't bother me, that we're working towards a rapid transit plan to meet a compliance model. But we know that as a rapid transit community, we would have 2 catchment areas for developable station area in Milton. Those would both be around Milton and Mattapan Station at Blue Hill Parkway. And I wonder why, when we're looking at different scenarios and options kind of as a relief valve, why we haven't more purposely pursued the option of some more densification by parcel reconfiguration along the Blue Hill Parkway Mattapan corridor, gateway entrances into the community, roadways that are multi-laned with parking, with wider sidewalks, with transit, enriched with amenities of commercialization options, including commuter rail. And we've kind of drawn a deaf eye towards a little bit more development in that area. I don't know why, and I would have liked, and I guess Zoe's still there, I'd like to know if UTL ever looked and explored for a little bit more development there, just in a short, very compact zone up to Brook Road, where there's some industry, there's a library, there was a commercial building that burnt down back in the early 70s that I made reference to in a letter that I sent to this body today. How would that have affected our ability to come up with a better plan relieving some of the stresses in many of these different sub-districts? And why are we not pursuing that? Perhaps it's not a great idea, but we haven't had the conversation about it, and I think that there's a diverse population that might like that as well, too. And we could refine that. One is, if you had larger development there, you'd also be working towards your 40B quotient of providing 15% affordable housing, but with the ability to tweak FIRs and unit counts there, you could put together something that's relatively moderately priced that would be beneficial for community, both in terms of people that live here, but also the communities who don't have this stressor from neighborhood to neighborhood. So I just ask for maybe some input from UTL if it's not too late, maybe, but nonetheless, I am perplexed by that not having been mentioned more often in this process.
Great.
Thank you.
Good. Zoe, do you want to touch on that? I think he's referring to the triplex area that we were, the west area.
Yeah, so we did look, let me just get myself oriented to the right street name there. You had mentioned, I think, Burke Street. So we did explore some areas in, along Blue Hills. We have in this plan the Parkway area, which we selected in part because it has a larger parcel size mix, which is more compatible with the multifamily that we're trying to achieve. So 3 units or more per lot is necessary to have it contribute towards compliance. We did study some areas along Brook Road, Austin Street, Brush Hill, and also looking at West Street, Collar Ave, and Laurel Road, and along Thatcher Street, as well as a larger kind of fan study area, in that sort of part of town. The main driver of the constraints there is that the parcel fabric is quite small, and so when we looked at ways to bring 3 units to the parcels that right now predominantly have single unit or 2 unit development, it required parameters that were quite tight, and also the lot sizes needed to be quite a bit smaller than what we're looking at elsewhere. So after kind of doing a couple different iterations of, what if we set the lot size higher and only allowed it on larger lots? Okay, the density doesn't work. What if we set it lower and we allowed this level of development on smaller lots? Does that work with the street pattern and the sort of levels of density and the amenities, the open space that's available? And ultimately, we decided that there were other districts that were a better fit for this rule set. At least I'm assuming that based on kind of the direction that we've received from the planning board. So I think it was really a function of the interaction of the rules that we're planning to, and the fabric of that part of town is really like predominantly a duplex, a dense duplex fabric, which is not particularly compatible with getting to 3 units and meeting all of the other town's goals around zoning parameters.
I may have not been clear enough, but I was referring to more densification, and having just listened to you talk about the Falcone property in East Milton, and thinking of 131 Elliott Street down in the Central Ave district, I was thinking development more or closer to that scale as you drive over the gateway into Milton for the first block or two along the major boulevards that I mentioned there, Blue Hill Parkway, Blue Hill Ave, and Brush Hill Road, which is an extension of Truman Highway, up to the Brook Road area, because that lends itself well to both mixed use and denser development with its close proximity to multiple transit lines, meaning the Mattapan Trolley, the commuter rail, at the confluence of major boulevards. So that's what I was thinking more specifically than the small ancillary streets that allow for very minimal development in that area.
Yeah, understood. So, I mean, right now, most of the gateway portion of Blue Hill Parkway is zoned. Brush Hill Road and Blue Hill Ave are not, in part because they do have that small parcel fabric, even though they are on a large road. And then the remaining parcel areas, either islands in the middle of that or preserved open space. So that's the constraints for the corridors, even though I agree with you from a form perspective, those larger roads can carry larger buildings. The parcel fabric is at odds with it.
But it was never seriously considered, and it sounds like.
It was considered.
It was considered. It was studied at great length, and we decided to move in a different direction.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Okay. So Cheyenne, are there any hands up? Anyone?
Yes, we have Andrea Lucio and Joni Martin.
Okay. We can invite Andrea to speak.
I think that hand went down. There's a different.
She's muted.
So our next would be Joni Martin.
Okay.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I have a question for Zoe, or actually the group of you. When you kept referring to Fairmont Hill or Fairmont Station, all the drawings seem to show different spots, and then I heard Smith Road mentioned, and I thought I heard 52 units. I might have that wrong. Can you show me on the plan exactly where on Smith Road? Because that's where we live. I'm trying to figure out where these units are going on Smith Road specifically. Can you hear me? Oh.
Yes, I can. I'm sorry if I was muted.
Yes,
I can. Okay. I can show you. One moment.
Because earlier, did you show Smith Road on your drawings? Because everything I saw was on the other side of Truman.
Joni, can you please give me your address?
I'm 90 Smith Road.
Thanks.
So this is the geography that is in the plan currently. You can see the portion that's along Smith Road is maybe 2 blocks worth along where it intersects with Carlson and Beacon. It goes 1, 2, 3, 5 parcels further along Smith Road after Beacon Street, just on that one side.
Wait. 5 parcels coming up from Beacon, like 1, 2, 3, 4. That's my house on the end there?
Here.
Yeah? Is that 90?
I don't have the addresses in front of me right now.
Because if you're talking about 68, the school, or the church, or whatever that's there, I just don't know, how many units are you looking to put on Smith Road, and at what address is that? Is that 68?
We're not planning any particular number of units for any part of town, but the compliance model does generate an assumed number of units that could be built based on the rules that we've generated. So I'm not sure it's useful to focus on a specific number of units for a specific parcel in this rule set, but
Zoe, this rule set allows 3 units per parcel, right?
Yes, that's true, yes. So across the board, every parcel in this district would be allowed 3 units under this rule set.
And this is,
So I'm still a bit confused. So you're saying 3 units could be built on one parcel?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, triple decker.
Yeah, 3 units in one building.
By right.
This is.
So in theory, how many units could be possibly built on Smith Road?
3, 6, 9,
I
12, about
don't have-
15.
There's 6 parcels, 6
It also would have to meet other dimensional criteria. It would have to be able to meet the setback requirements, the height, the FAR, the open space. So it's not clear that every parcel would be able to meet every one of those criteria. And that's why I think.
However, if they met the criteria, is it six parcels? 6 parcels?
6 parcels times
Yeah,
3.
so 18 units. If they met the criteria.
And they're larger lots, so they
Some are small,
probably
though.
would meet the criteria.
There's 2 small ones I see there. One of those might be Beacon Street, on the corner there of Beacon and Smith. So there might be 4 parcels that are on Smith, actually. But 1 small, there's 2 that are medium and 1 larger, looking at that map.
Excuse me, we're up to 3 minutes.
Okay, thank you for answering that.
thank you, Joni. Okay, all right. Yes, you want one more and then we'll.
Anthony Larkin again. I just had a clarifying question on the motion. I heard, Cheryl, you say the move to present the 25% plan, but I thought I heard earlier that we were going to bring both plans. Was that because the 10% plan was already approved?
Yes.
When you were
Yes.
just bringing the 25?
Yeah.
Okay.
Correct.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
And before we have you till leave, the question back to the FAR gradations, Zoe, that you said you could look at. It would be great if you could do that for Tuesday. I'm not sure that's possible, but in other words, if you had, right now the FAR changes at a 5,000 square foot increment in the lot size, and if you could adjust it to every 2,500 square feet, that would limit the size of the largest buildings on those larger lots as you get into that square footage difference in lot size.
Where do you stand on that one?
Yeah, we can work on that for Tuesday. Is there consensus among the planning board that you'd like us to pursue that?
Yes.
Everybody agree
Yeah,
with that?
yeah.
Do the start at the 0.5 or the 0.4 is that recommended? Or suggested, I should say.
Well, at 6,000 square feet, at 3,000, you have to have 1,000 per unit. That's 3,000 square feet. So you've got to have it at 0.5. Yeah.
Break points, so at the 6,000.
So it has to start at 0.5 on a 6,000 square foot lot and then get smaller as the lots get larger.
0.5 drops as we move forward with 2,500 increment?
Right. It does now, but there's not those intermittent increments.
Before we have you to part the meeting, could we have tomorrow by email at least the last version of the summary that we had? Even if you're still tweaking, Zoe, if you could at least give it to us, the most current V2
Yeah.
that you have tomorrow morning. Would that be all right?
Yeah, I can, before I sign off tonight, I can PDF this presentation and share it with Cheyenne so she can forward it along to you.
That would be
great.
really good. Thank you.
Good. Yeah, sure.
Ada Rosemarin, 32 Columbine Road, and just want to thank you all for all the work that's gone into this. It's been going on for a long time for our whole community, and I feel hopeful that we've arrived at some agreement. Nobody's happy about the whole thing, but that's kind of what a compromise is about. But thank you for getting us to this moment. One technical question while we've still got Zoe here is about the numbers and percentages of parcels in the Elliott Street corridor and how that compares with what we had in 2023. I'm just wondering if you can.
Did you mean how many are now contributing?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Sort of like out of the total number. I think last.
As in like how many parcels are not eligible
Right, because before it was 50% were ineligible when we had the minimum lot size at 7,500.
Yeah. JT, do you think you could take a look at,
Yeah,
in that smallest tier, how many of them are getting knocked out completely?
yes.
Is that
It'll
what
take
you're
us a
asking?
few minutes to get that number, but we can get it to
I
you.
don't think that's
Or
what
you're
you're
just
asking.
asking how many
Are you
units?
asking
Yeah,
total?
yeah, total,
Increase
total, like
2023
out
to
of,
2025?
out of the
I think she's asking
2461
about
or
the
whatever the
ratio.
total is, how much of that is in the Elliott Street corridor in this
Oh,
current plan?
oh, sorry, I think I was going on a different line of questioning, so I'll share my screen 1 second.
Because I think in 2023, it was like 70-something%.
So this is the latest that we just ran, so that's the 555 number is the Elliott Street corridor, and the total number of units that's shown here is 2464.
You might have to read those, Zoe, because I cut off on our screen here at the bottom.
We can't see it.
Oh, okay,
22%.
yeah,
72,
22.
22%.
22.
22% are in the tier 1, tier 2, tier 3.
Yes.
Yeah, our in Elliott Street corridor as a whole is currently supporting in this scheme 22.5% of all of the units that we are zoning for in this scheme.
Okay. And what about the Milton Station?
East-west bridge.
West and Bridge, yeah, because those are, and Mattapan, I mean, those are all right in the Elliott Street area.
I think that's what I calculated at 64% earlier.
Scroll down.
Milton Village is about 25%, 24.62%. If you look at these numbers here.
So these are kind of the tallies, and then they're relative to this number here,
Some of those
so.
dropped even more, yeah.
Right.
So it's 338, no wait, 362, no, 555, and 609.
Well, that's very helpful. Yeah, this
That's
this
even less
part of
than-
the
okay.
screen was cut off from what we could see here, so that's, yes, thank you. Thank you for
Mm-hmm.
that. And then my last question is, between now and town meeting, do you have any kind of more community engagement that could happen to educate town meeting members and the community and people who live in all of these neighborhoods about what's in this plan and what it will mean? 'Cause I think
We'll
that
post
would
it
be
on our website, and we can maybe talk to the staff on. I don't think we'll be making additional presentations, but it will be posted and available for people.
I think we're going to need a pretty
We'll need a public
robust presentation,
We'll-
and we'll need a public
We'll
hearing.
need public hearings. Yeah, I should have said that. That's, we'll need at least probably 2 public hearings to let people
Okay.
see what when it's all ready and the zoning language is all complete. So, which hopefully we'll have that by Tuesday. So,
Great, great. Well, thank you. All right.
good, thank you. Okay, all right. Zoe and JT and Matthew, thank you so much. We appreciate the work
Yeah,
on this
thank you
tonight.
all.
Okay,
Thank you, guys.
You're welcome, good night.
Thanks very much.
Take care.
Thank you.
thank you. So we just have one last housekeeping item, and it was on the East Milton zoning, which we've submitted to the warrant committee already. We recognized we wanted to add one sentence change, which is on, it's B, D, ground floor uses, and it would read, ground floor uses shall promote an active pedestrian environment and lively streetscape. And then the next sentence, we just added, and shall be occupied by, because that was the other, we'd already voted on that, shall be. But then we also have occupied by non-residential uses in section BB, except that parking shall not be permitted to satisfy this requirement. So I just need a motion to accept that change.
Is that what I had submitted?
Yeah.
Yeah, I just felt like it was better to separate them out into those 2 sentences.
Do you want to look at it?
Yeah, just real quickly.
Pass it and just.
So at this point, it isn't a motion for us to amend because it's already, well, it hasn't gone,
It's gone to the warrant committee, the warrant committee has voted on it, so we need to revote the changes, submit it to the warrant committee, and then they would need to revote on our, based on our change.
okay, so I'll make a well, I'll let Maggie read it first.
Go ahead, make your motion. I'm going to be fine with it.
Okay. I'll make a motion to amend, which,
I've already talked about it,
Jim, tell me which section that is again.
the bottom.
Where are we? Section B, D.
Section B, subsection D of the mixed-use overlay zoning.
Right, Milton? Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, and with that, a motion to adjourn?
So moved?
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you, guys.